How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
street out. Is this the end? Is this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in dystopia. This is the final sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree? Travel the world and the seven seas. Everybody's looking for something. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to get used by you. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to be out you.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Rum links, zwei, drei, rum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil ich ein Genialwalter einmeinst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Rum links, zwei, drei, rum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil ich ein Genialwalter einmeinst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Rum links, 2, 3, rum links, 2, 3, und ein Platzgenosse ist. Freilich heim in die Arbeiter-Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Who the fuck is Karlyn? She's just some sweet lady. She's like in a knitting. She does like a knitting stream. She's like a knitting YouTuber. She does knitting.
Zdravstvuyte, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is when we watch the real far left, the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian. And we do this little exercise every single week. Why on earth would you hate that clip? That clip is fabulous. That clip is everything. What are you talking about? We do this exercise every single week so that you guys can see what the real far left is saying and doing in the real world. I have this crazy idea. I've been studying the far left for a long time now. And I have this crazy idea that it's not enough to know that 150 years ago, Marx said something in a paper. I have a crazy idea that it's not good enough to know what Engels wrote in a book one time. I have this crazy idea that it's not good enough to know that Gramsci came up with the idea of the Long March Through the Institutions. I have this crazy idea that it's not enough to know that Horkheimer and Adorno and all of the other people involved with the Frankfurt School were almost all Jewish intellectuals. I have a theory that if you want to know what the real far left is doing in the real world today, you can't go back into history and look at the philosophy that was written and expect that the philosophy is going to tell you what the real far left is doing in the real world. We live in a glorious time where there are sites all over the internet where the far left is posting exactly what they're saying and doing in the real world. They post their lectures, they post their trainings, they post their conferences, they post their events, they post their book launches, they post their organizing meetings. They sometimes have their organizing meetings live on the internet where we can go and join them. And so if you want to know what the real far left is doing in the real world, you gotta listen to them. You have to take the time to listen to them, and you have to take the time to learn their language. You have to take the time to understand how it's different than the language that you probably think it is. You have to take the time to understand how much your conservative influencers and pundits have lied to you about the far left. You have to unlearn basically everything that you think you know, which is quite a process, and come back to basics if you want to study the real far left. Now, I don't know who you are, but the show has been live for less than 2 minutes and you're already pissing me off. See, the thing is about Socialism Saturday, for people who are new, we can put the chat on the screen. The thing about Socialism Saturday is you guys have walked into a classroom. This is not a stream on the internet where you can shitpost and act like a bunch of unhinged retards in the chat. This is a classroom. This is an open air classroom where anyone is welcome to come and join. Anyone is welcome to come and learn with us. Anyone is welcome to come and do this research with us. But we do take this seriously. And so I have certain rules that you will follow or you will just be removed from my chat. And that's just going to be the way it is. Well, your first step is going to be to listen. Now you're already on strike too, so you're already not listening. This is going to go real well for you, I promise you. Hey, Simona! Thank you for the super chat. Dr. Karlyn, I stumbled in a socialist queer art group and they had a library of these zines. Would I be interested in looking at them? Yes. Yes, I would. Yes, I would. I absolutely would. On that topic, I also want to give a great big shout out to the mystery gentleman who sent me a giant hard drive full of socialist propaganda recently. I got this big package the other day and Victor was like, Karlyn, what the hell is this? And I'm like, I don't even know what this is. And then I opened the package and it was, oh my God, you're acting like a liberal bitch. You're banned in my chat, bro. Sorry, not smart enough to be here at all. So I opened this package that I got and it was a giant hard drive of socialist propaganda and it's awesome and I'm really excited about it. Simona, can you DM me? Can you either DM me or email me? You can DM me on Twitter, you can DM me on Substack, or you can email me through my website, decodetheleft.com. Get in touch with me and I will tell you exactly where to send it, and I really do appreciate it. Simona is also on the board for the first super chat of the night. Guys, on Socialism Saturday, we do have a nominal super chat goal of $100 if you feel free to show your appreciation for the fact that I hunt down this content on the internet. I find it. I spend the time breaking it down and all this stuff. I answer your questions about what's going on. You can also respect the fact that I keep the unhinged retards out of the chat. Like that asshole I just blocked who was going to just cause a disturbance the whole time, because we're in a classroom and we take this seriously, and sadly, not everyone takes this seriously. Did you see what I posted in the Substack? No, I honestly haven't looked at really that much at the Substack today, Donnie girl. I promise I will take a look, though. I haven't seen it yet, but I promise I will. So, speaking of what we're watching today, I'm real excited about this episode, actually. This is Columbia University's website. Columbia University, of course, is basically ground zero, the epicenter for all things leftist insanity in the United States. The reason that Columbia University is the epicenter for that is because when the Frankfurt School came over during World War II to America, they set up shop at Columbia University. This is ground zero for all of the insanity that we have to deal with. Columbia University has only gotten worse since, as has every other college and university, because that's what the long march through the institutions was. And Columbia University today is still the home of some of the most woke students and graduates and professors in the country. One of the things that I've talked about consistently is when it comes to the universities, it's not enough to just look at what's being taught in the classroom, although that is certainly important. The classroom is obviously the primary, some would argue that the classroom is the primary goal of the university. However, unless you've been in higher education, you might not know that professors in higher education do a whole lot more than teach. A lot of professors in higher education do these things like create institutes and centers where they do all their research and fund all their research through grants and other things. So a lot of the most woke research coming out of the universities is coming out of these random little small centers where they do research projects and they do lecture series and they do all this stuff that no one ever looks at and no one ever pays attention to, but they're all there operating all the time. I'm working on a way to try to track all of these things in real time, so we're going to be able to see it, because college, of course, is coming back into session, and this is something that we want to keep an eye on. No, I have no plans to interview William Shatner. No, absolutely not. No. So the other day, I was trolling around Columbia's website, and I found myself on the Institute for the Study of Sexuality and Gender. The Institute for the Study of Sexuality and Gender is one of those weird centers that I'm talking about. It's not a classroom, but it's something that students can go and participate in and do research and stuff like that, and they publish all sorts of crazy shit. So I'm on the website for the Institute for Sexuality and Gender, and I go to their events section, and I find out that back in March, the Institute for the Study of Sexuality and Gender literally had a lecture titled Queer Marxism, the Making of Queer Radical Tradition. Is there any such thing as queer radical tradition, and what is the relationship between queerness and Marxism? This talk reconsiders the history of radical queer politics since 1968. Holy shit, this sounds a whole lot like a book I'm writing right now. Holy shit. This sounds a whole lot like the Queer Marxism book that I'm literally working on right now. That there will be another chapter of it, or maybe even as many as 2 or 3 going up this weekend on the Red Menace Collective Substack. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com. This is where you can read draft chapters of my book before they're published, before it actually becomes the next book, so you actually get to read the book as it's coming together. I've already written the first 2 chapters of this book. We get the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis, who were 2 basically gay and lesbian rights organizations that were precursors to queer Marxism as we know it today. And I'm working on chapter 3 right now, which is all about the Stonewall riot, which happened in 1969, which some say that was the turning point of queer activism. I actually think it's earlier. I think it was in 1966 with Compton's cafeteria riot. Nonetheless, it doesn't really matter. This is literally the topic of a book that I'm working on right now. Pete, thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. Let's add that to the total. So when I saw this lecture, I was like, damn, I really want to watch that lecture. And it's by Alex Stoffel, who we've watched before, who actually does speak in relatively plain language. He's a little twink gay kid that has a PhD and teaches at like the University of London or something like that. But he actually does talk about this stuff in relatively plain-spoken language. This talk reconsiders the history of radical queer politics since 1968 against common framings of queer politics as either a progressive campaign for state recognition or a subcultural rejection of prevailing gender norms. Holy shit! That sounds a lot like what I've been saying in regards to anti-assimilationist queer Marxist activists and assimilationist LGBTQ Democrats and liberals, which are two different strains of activism that operated side by side. So people oftentimes get these confused, just in case people are new. Essentially what happened is you had the normie gay rights movement, the Democrats and the liberals that literally just wanted gay people to be able to get married and have jobs and stuff like that. They are the assimilationist activists. They are the ones that want to assimilate to capitalist culture. Side by side, you have the radical revolutionary queer Marxists who are the anti-assimilationists, the anti-capitalists. People think these are the same movement. They are not the same movement. These movements have been in conflict with each other throughout history, and the only people who seem to know that these movements are in conflict with each other are the queer Marxists who are actually involved as activists, because if you look at the conservative right, they think all this stuff is the same, but these are two very distinct groups, and it looks like the guy literally giving the lecture at Columbia about queer Marxism is saying these are two different groups. It provides an alternative view of queer radicalism and clarifies its true scale. Well, that will be very helpful. Revisiting the gay liberation movement, black lesbian feminism, and AIDS activism, that's going to be the ACT UP movement. It explores the relationship between the struggles for sexual freedom and the questions of capital accumulation. You don't say. You don't say. You're telling me that queer is an anti-capitalist ideology? I had no idea. Did you guys know that being queer is not about being gay or trans? It's all about destroying capitalism and annihilating capitalism? Empire and state violence. The queer radical tradition is shown to have not only conditioned the trajectory of intersex maybe, history, and also to have radicalized wider anti-imperialist, that means capitalist, socialists, and abolitionist struggles past and present. Now, I found this event and I was like, damn. Damn. I really wish they had a video of this event. This would be an awesome thing to watch. And then I found their Vimeo channel. And the very first video on the Vimeo channel for the Institute for Research into Sexuality and Gender at Columbia University happened to be a recording of the very lecture that I wanted to watch. And the sky opened and the sun shone through and the Hallelujah chorus sang down from the sky. Because now we get to watch exactly the thing that I wanted to watch, and it's going to help with my research, and I think that's pretty great, and I hope you guys are here for it, because this is a class and a research group, and, you know, I don't just suffer by myself when I watch this. We all suffer together. So tonight, we're going to be watching this lecture, Queer Marxism, the Making of the Queer Radical Tradition, and we're going to learn what he had to say about assimilationists versus anti-assimilationists and all the rest of it, and I would bet money that it's going to inform the book I'm literally working on right now, so the timing for this could not be better. This is what we do on Socialism Saturday, guys. So welcome to Socialism Saturday. If this is your first time at Socialism Saturday, please let us know. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are a Socialism Saturday newbie, please let us know. I understand I can be intimidating. I understand that sometimes I yell. But I'm much less likely to yell at you if you tell us that you're new and you tell us that you haven't been here before. I do try to ease in the people who are new to watching socialism, because watching socialism can be a bit of a shock to people, because if you're new to watching socialism, you're about to find out that there is an awful lot of information that your conservative influencers never told you that literally has always been publicly available, but conservative retards who control conservative right-leaning media never, ever, 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 ever talk about this stuff. And so what that means is their audiences are pretty ignorant on the subject. That's not your fault. That's not your fault. That's their fault. But once you understand that there is a whole world of information out there about the far left that you haven't been exposed to, that's your responsibility to say, okay, what do I not know? And trust me, you don't know a lot. You don't know a lot. And so if you let us know that you're new, we will do our very best to take care of you. Couple orders of business before we get started. Number one, if you are new to my work, the very best place to start off is my Substack. That is Karlyn, KarlynSubstack.com. This is my primary content hub on the internet. It's where you can find my clips. It's where you can find my breakdowns of the far left. It's where you can find my explainer articles. Make sure you avail yourselves of things like the Woke 101 section, where I have all sorts of articles explaining the far left. We've got the Woke Mind section, where I talk about the psychology of the far left. We've got all sorts of videos and stuff on there too. Also, the How to Speak Socialist section, which you can find right at the top. If you are new to my work and you want an in-depth crash course, I have not one but two. I have a 90-minute crash course and I have a 4-hour crash course for people who want more information. You can find the links to both of those videos over on the How to Speak Socialist section of the Substack. The re-education video is a 90-minute introduction to the far left. It will give you an overview of what you need to know about leftist language, because what you'll find out through things like Socialism Saturday is that you might think you are speaking the same language of the left, but I promise you, you are not speaking the same language. They have their own dialect, they have their own dictionary, they have their own definitions. Just because you define a word as something, that does not mean the far left agrees with you. And the goal of what we're trying to do with watching socialism in the far left is to understand their language and their perspective, because if you do not understand your enemy, you cannot defeat them. So you can find the re-education video over on the Substack. All of this is completely for free, so you can check that out. You've also got the 4-hour on-demand masterclass if you would prefer that. Dang. Another way you can support the work I'm doing is by heading over to the Red Menace Supply Company. That is redmenacesupply.com. This is formerly the Unwoke Art Store. You can also still get there by going to unwokeart.com, but we are transitioning over to a new brand because I can't use the word woke anymore because it's been ruined by classical liberal idiots like James Lindsay. The word woke is irrevocably ruined. There is no saving it. I don't want to be associated with it anymore. I used to love it. I had a whole unwoke empire. I had everything branded as unwoke, and now I have to change because James Lindsay ruined everything. But that's all right, because I got a badass Plague Doctor logo, and the Red Menace brand is something that I actually really do enjoy, and I think it's more badass anyway. Red Menace is a reference to what they used to call communism in the era of McCarthyism, and I quite frankly think we need to bring it back. And the reason we have a Plague Doctor logo for everything that I'm doing is we are like the Plague Doctor going into the plague-ridden area. Just like California, the bubonic plague is now back in California. We're going to be getting a new Plague Doctor design in the store this week in honor of the bubonic plague coming back to California, and so we are like we are the Plague Doctor going into the plague infested area to try to save as many people as we can, and that is the whole point. And you can pick up some cool merch in the Red Menace Supply Company, and check this out. We got a couple specials. We have a couple new designs in the store that are on sale until tomorrow evening. Every single time I launch a new design in the store, it is 25% off for the first week that it's in the store, and then after that it goes back up to normal price. So what we have right now is we have the Bonfires Are Needed design. This was a design that people have been waiting for me to put in the store for a long ass time. It is a bonfire with some books that some might say are queer. Some might say the books being burned are queer. You know, who's really to tell? And you might imagine why they're being burned. This comes in black, it comes in this lighter color, and it comes in orange, which I think looks pretty badass. If I'm honest about it, everything with the Bonfires Are Needed design is available 25% off until tomorrow evening. Also, we have the new Center for Left-Wing Studies designs, including the sick Letterman jacket, which I will be getting, basically because I think it's awesome. With the Orwell Eye logo, the Center for Left-Wing Studies is my nonprofit, and the logo, of course, is awesome. So you can pick that up too. And that is also 25% off until tomorrow evening. And then they go back up to normal price. And I will be launching some cool merch in the store next week. And you can pick up that too. And all of these purchases do go to support the work I'm doing, which I really, really appreciate. Do I have anything else? Oh, yeah. Oh, I do have one more thing. Hang on. Let me take a sip of this beer. Well, breaking news. Hang on. Why am I coughing so much? Hang on. Dang. This is really important. I can't be coughing during this, all right? All right. Breaking news. Breaking news. Communists on the internet are mad at me. The communists on the internet are mad at me. And quite frankly, I don't actually care. Here's what happened. The other day, we did a stream about the American Communist Party. I mentioned this on the stream, but I'll just reiterate for people who weren't there, you haven't had a chance to watch the stream yet. I am asked all the time about the American Communist Party and why I don't cover the American Communist Party, because I cover all the relevant different groups on the far left, but I never, ever, ever cover the American Communist Party. And my answer to that since the very beginning has been the American Communist Party is not a real thing. It is a social media stunt. They're not active in real leftist activist circles at all. They're not real activists. They don't go to any real leftist events. When I listen to real leftists, real communists, and socialists talk about them, they have no respect for them at all. And so I believe that the American Communist Party is completely irrelevant. I don't think we should waste any time on them at all. I think Haz al-Din is a complete and total fraud. I think Jackson Hinkle is nothing more than a clout chaser. This is not real. This is nothing more than a social media stunt. And you don't even have to take my word for it. Because the other day, we watched a video, a brand new video from the Denver Communists. The Denver Communists are actually real revolutionary activists. We watch the Denver Communists all the time. Listen, man, the Denver Communists may not like me, and I certainly don't like them, but the Denver Communists post great content on the internet. They are real leftist activists. They go to real leftist events. I've actually met some of them in person. I was undercover at the time. They didn't know it, but that's okay. The Denver Communists are part of something called the Firebrand Collective, which is a decentralized network of radical revolutionary groups all over the country. And so oftentimes the Denver Communists actually post really great content to let us know what real revolutionary socialists and communists believe. So they may not like me, but I like them. And I'll be the very first to say, these are real communists. This is the real deal. This is not a social media LARP. This is actually real. The Denver Communists the other day posted a video about the American Communist Party not being communist. The Denver Communists think that the American Communist Party are downright fascists. They think Haz is a complete and total joke. And they did a half-hour rant. I have listened to a lot of Denver Communist videos. I have never heard the Denver Communists be so passionate about anything anything more than the American Communist Party are not real communists. They are in fact fascists, and MAGA communism is stupid and it's not real for a reason X, Y, B, and Z. They were extremely explicit about the whole thing, right? So we watched that video on the channel. After I watched that video on the channel, we had a visit from this jackass. This guy came into the channel yesterday, and he was in the chat complaining, and he says, I am a representative of the American Communist Party, and you have to debate our executive chairman, Haz al-Din. And I was like, I don't think that's actually going to happen. But you know what? I wasn't completely closed off to the idea from the start. I was actually kind of like, well, let's just see how they position it, like, whatever. It wasn't a total no from me at first. It was more like, I don't know about this, but maybe it would be entertaining. That was really the thought in my head. It's not that I actually think that Hawes is a real communist, because I don't think that Hawes is a real communist. My thought was, it could be entertaining. It could be funny. We're not going to learn anything from the situation. It's going to be a complete waste of time, but it might be entertaining. But, you know, I'm kind of on this kick lately where I'm just kind of over internet toxicity. I'm just kind of like over it, honestly. Like, I'm old, guys. I mean, obviously I'm 29, but like maybe I'm older than 29. I'm just over it. I'm fucking over it. Like, I'm over all the middle school drama and like shit posting and toxicity and all this stuff. I'm just over it. And I've kind of decided that, like, I just don't want to be in a place where I'm interacting with people who are just needlessly rude. If you're being needlessly rude and you're being cruel and you're doing it for no reason, like, I haven't actually I can be a bitch on the internet. Don't get it twisted. If someone provokes me, I will absolutely be a bitch. But if I haven't said anything to you and I haven't done anything and I haven't been rude to you and I haven't name called you and you come and you attack me aggressively, I'm just going to be like, nah, not interested, because it's not fun for me. So this guy actually started getting rude and belligerent in my chat, and so I ended up banning him. And then he came into my DMs on Twitter and he was like, let me know when you'd like to be taken to school on communism by Chairman Haz al-Din, and I'll arrange the conversation. I can relay your preferred pronouns ahead of time as well. Well, here's the thing. Being aggressively rude is not actually the way to get me to do something. It's just not. So, well, I did initially have kind of the thought that maybe it would be entertaining to debate Hawes. The minute that they start being insulting and needlessly rude and antagonistic, it's kind of like, this is not an intellectually honest conversation. And that's really what matters to me. Is this going to be an intellectually honest conversation where it's actually going to be a discussion of ideas, or is this going to be wrestling in the mud with a pig, and I don't really want to be in the mud, but the pig really likes being in the mud, and is this just going to be shit slinging and bullshit and nonsense? Because if so, I'm just not interested, man. I'm really just not. So that was the impression that the American Communist Party representative gave me, was that this is going to be a giant fuck off waste of my time. It's just going to be, they're going to be insulting and rude and cruel the whole time. There's not going to be any substantive discussion on anything. This is not a real debate. This is not a real debate. This is not an intellectual exercise. This is nothing more than bullshit and shit posting on the internet, which I hate more than anything in the world. Well, the communists are upset. And now apparently the communists have issued a press release or something saying the following: breaking, full-time streamer and self-identified PhD holder Karlyn Borysenko rejected an offer to debate Haz al-Din on the significance of the American Communist Party. Experts believe Borysenko was brainwashed by Trotskyist media. If you were trying to convince me that you were being intellectually honest, American Communist Party, this was a really bad way to go about it. Because first off, I'm not a full-time streamer. I stream for a couple hours a day. I do many other things. You can call me a writer. You can call me a journalist. You can call me a researcher. There are many other things. I actually do have a PhD in real life. I wasn't the one that granted myself the PhD. And I certainly don't think I've been brainwashed by Trotskyist media. And you're issuing some sort of press release or announcement because you're pissed off that I correctly pointed out that the American Communist Party is not relevant on the real far left. They are not real communists. The whole MAGA communism thing is a joke. It always was. There is no such thing as MAGA communism. No one on the real far left takes the American Communist Party seriously, etc., etc., etc. It's like, this is not an intellectually honest discussion. And so I responded to them and I said, ROFL, why would I waste time debating a fake communist that real communist activists don't even respect? And then you're getting responses like this saying, I'm afraid. Nah, bro. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen, communists. Not gonna happen. You want to know why, communists? Because we're all smarter than all of you. and we don't want to lower ourselves, and there is no point to this. And here's the deal. Here's the deal. Here is the deal that I'll make with the American Communist Party. If the American Communist Party can find one real communist group that takes them seriously, I'll debate him. Here's the deal. I want to hear from a real leftist organization in the United States. I want to hear from authors that publish with Haymarket Books. I want to hear from groups that sponsor the Socialism Conference. I want to hear from the Democratic Socialists of America. I want to hear from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I want to hear from the Revolutionary Communists of America. I want to hear from the Denver Communists, Seattle Revolutionary Socialists, Boston Revolutionary Socialists, New York Revolutionary Socialists, any revolutionary socialist group that I've covered on this channel. Literally pick one. I've covered a ton of different revolutionary socialist groups on this channel. Like, show me an Antifa chapter. Show me an Antifa chapter that is on the side of the American Communist Party. Show me literally just one real revolutionary communist group in America that is on the side of the American Communist Party and considers the American Communist Party to be a real thing. Just one. If I have ever covered a communist group on this channel, and there's over 5,000 hours of me covering communist and leftist groups on this channel, you should be able to find one. If I have ever covered a communist group, and you can show me an example of a communist group that I've covered that says the American Communist Party is a real thing, then I'll debate Haas. But if they cannot provide one single example of one far leftist group that takes them seriously, Haas can go fuck himself. Everyone knows this is a big social media joke, and I'm not wasting my time on it because I don't actually really care that much. So that's it. American Communist Party fail. And now we're actually going to listen to the real far left. So guys, we are getting into the show now. We are going to be watching a lecture today that happened at Columbia University back in March about queer Marxism and queer radical liberatory activism, and I'm really excited about this. Before we get into the lecture, I want everyone to direct their attention to this video, which will help you with some rules of Socialism Saturday. All right, for anyone that's new, we have some rules for Socialism Saturday. Let me go over them real quick. Socialism Saturday is a research group and a class. We do take this seriously. You're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to have a drink or two. You're allowed to kind of kick back and joke in the chat. However, I need everyone to understand that when we are researching the radical revolutionary left, we do take this seriously. And so if you're shitposting in my chat, I'm going to tell you to stop. If you are posting off topic in the chat, I'm going to ask you to stop at some point because it's going to be distracting to what we're doing. I need you to think of yourself as in a classroom. And I'm not talking about an online classroom. I'm talking about a real-life classroom, okay? When you walk into a real-life classroom, I am the teacher, you are the students. You are sitting in the desk. I am sitting in the front of the classroom. I'm standing there teaching you what is going on. If you were in a real-life classroom, you wouldn't walk in, start throwing shit at the wall, yelling, saying, I disagree with you because my best friend said something different. That's not allowed. I don't care about your feelings. I'm not going to coddle your opinion. And that's going to be the way it is. And if you don't like it, you don't have to be here. But if you are in my classroom, you will respect my rules and you will listen to me. And if you do not do that, then you will be removed. And how you feel about being removed makes no difference to me at all. The expectation is if you're going to be here and you're going to be watching socialism with us and you're going to be participating in the chat, you are doing it because you are serious about learning this topic and understanding this topic. The minute that I think that you're just fucking around or you're trolling or something like that, you're going to get put in a timeout or permanently banned, and that's just going to be the way it is. Rule number 2, don't be a dick. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in the chat. I can do whatever I want because I am the queen fascist bitch of my YouTube channel. So I can say and do whatever I want. But if you don't insult me and you don't insult other people in the chat, we're not going to have a problem. So be an adult, rein that shit in. Number 3, no whining. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care if you feel personally attacked. It makes no difference to me at all. And I promise you, I care about your feelings a little bit more than the left does. So if you can't handle me, you can't handle the left. If you start whining and complaining because you don't like the rules or you think you're being treated unfairly, you can just leave, bro. There's the door. You don't have to be here. Number 4, listen. Our job here and why we do Socialism Saturday is to listen to what the left is saying, to listen to what real leftists are doing in the real world. This is not to support your confirmation bias. This is not to support any conservative bullshit narrative that you may have heard on Glenn Beck that one time. This is not to be what you want it to be. This is to engage with reality. We need to listen, we need to actively listen, and we need to understand the left better than they understand themselves. That is the purpose of this exercise, okay? As part of that, I do ask that people refrain from debunking. You do not have a single debunk in your arsenal about the left is stupid because of reasons X, Y, B, and Z, or the left is her hypocrites for reasons X, Y, B, and Z. You don't have a single debunk that we haven't heard before, okay? And every time you put energy into debunking, that is energy that you're not putting into listening. So if I see you debunking, I'm going to tell you to stop, because you need to put that energy into listening instead. Lastly, break the rules of my chat or disrespect me in any way, and I'll just kick you out, and that's the way it is. All right, guys, welcome to Socialism Saturday. We are about to get started. The super chat goal is in effect. As a reminder, the sooner we hit the super chat goal, the much less likely I am to yell at someone. If you appreciate the work I do, finding all this content for you guys, I was researching until like 4 a.m. on the internet, finding this content for you guys. I'm just saying, feel free to throw in $5, $10, $20, $100, $500 if you want. If you can give me more money than $100, that's totally fine. But please feel free to chip in, because guys, I am 100% funded by people just like you. Subscribe to my Substack, contribute to the super chat goal. That's what keeps me in business. I cannot do this without you guys, and I really, really appreciate it. We're going to dig into this queer Marxism lecture, and we're going to find out what they talked about. Why can't I do the full screen? Uh-oh. What's going on? Do I have to log in or something? Nope, there it goes. I just had to reload. Full screen.
Okay, so hi everyone.
Come on. Oh, it paused accidentally. My bad. Why is it not playing? What the fuck? Play!
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Tulio. I am a PhD student here at Columbia. I'd like to start just by saying thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your interest in Alex's incredible book, and also in queer Marxism more broadly.
Okay, Yasmin, the answer is no, and I don't want to hear anything else about it. I really don't. I don't care about getting clout through Hawes and Jackson Hinkle, who are followed by low IQ retards. We are now watching the lecture. Please stop. There is no universe that this debate is going to happen.
The idea for this talk started last year when Alex and we were presenting at the Historical Materialism Conference at the Sexuality and Political Economy strand. And if you're interested in gender, sexuality, and political economy, or queer Marxism, or gender and Marxism, I highly recommend you to check it. And that was when Alex told me he was coming to the US for a book tour. And I immediately said, well, you have to come to Columbia. So all that to say, thank you so much, Alex, for being here, for accepting our invitation. And thank you, ICLS and ISSG, for making this event possible. Especially thank you, Sarah Monks, for all the work in making this event possible. I'm just going to read a very brief introduction to Alex, and then Alex is going to speak for about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to give a brief response, and then we're going to open to questions. So Alex Stoffel is Assistant Professor in International Politics at Queen Mary University of London. His research takes up critical questions regarding the intersections of sexuality, race, and desire within capitalist expansion.
Within capitalist
expansion. He has published
expansion.
in, among other journals, International Studies Quarterly, the European Journal of International Relations, the International Feminist Journal of Politics, and Salvage, and is an editor of the journal Historical Materialism, where he convenes the Sexuality and Political Economy Network. So, Alex.
Okay, thanks all of you for coming on a Monday evening. Thanks to you online for joining as well. Thank you, Tulio, for inviting me. And thank you to Sarah and Jeannie for organizing and coordinating the event. I'm really delighted to be here. Before I start, I have to express my solidarity with the Barnard students who are currently facing down the NYPD on their own campus. And
Solidarity,
fighting to defend their
comrade.
right and all of our right to speak freely and to assemble and to protest against genocide and occupation. So I will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes, actually. And then my talk is divided into 4 parts. First, I'll offer some reflections on what it means to attempt a synthesis of queerness and Marxism, and how that kind of endeavor relates to the broader discipline of queer studies. In the second part, I turn to the book Eros and Empire that recently came out.
Hey, I just want to do a quick pause to say welcome to Warrior for DJT over on Rumble, a new viewer of Socialism Saturday. Well, not really new, but reading 2 of my books, which I really do appreciate. If you have any questions about the language or anything like that, please let me know in the chat.
And I will outline how I think about empire and US empire more specifically in the book. Then the third part will explain what it means to think about US political struggles as taking shape in relation to US empire. And then in the final section, I'll venture some more speculative remarks about the changing character of US empire today and what that means for struggles for gender and sexual freedom. Okay, so first, queer Marxism. So the title for this event, which is Queer Marxism, the Making of a Radical Queer Tradition, as some of you might have noticed, is somewhat provocatively taken from Cedric Robinson's book, Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition. That book wasn't widely read when it was published in 1983, but in recent years, it's become something of an essential reading for people who are interested in critiques of capitalism and Black struggle and radical political thought. But the book's title is actually a little bit misleading. So you might know this if you picked up the book in the hope of discovering a synthesis of Marxism and the Black question. The book actually doesn't provide that. On the contrary, it reads sort of primarily as a critique of the Western Marxist.
Hey, thanks, Warrior, for DJT over on Rumble. I don't have a big mouth, but just wanted to let you know I appreciate you. Thanks for recognizing me. He just sent in a $5 Rumble rant. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Tradition, and it's a failure to account for the conditions and struggles of African people in the so-called peripheries. So my book, Eros and Empire, actually makes some similar moves. So it argues first that there is a queer radical tradition, one that I call erotic world making. Second, that queer resistance movements develop their own intellectual...
He calls the queer radical tradition erotic world making. Well, this makes total and complete sense because queer activists are obsessed with BDSM and kink and obsessed with queering sex and all those things. And so it does actually make complete and total sense that they would call this erotic world making.
It argues first that there is a queer radical tradition, one that I call erotic world making. Second, that queer resistance movements develop their own intellectual frameworks and modes of thought and political ideologies. Third, that traditional Marxism hasn't adequately accounted for sexuality and the unique historical conditions of queer struggle.
Because it's a gain
and
of
fourth,
function
that
thing.
queer radical thought and practice intervened in capitalist social forms, even if the actors themselves didn't understand themselves as explicitly Marxist.
Again, queer activists, what? They, let's just listen.
Ideologies. Third, that traditional Marxism hasn't adequately accounted for sexuality and the unique historical conditions of queer struggle. And fourth, that queer radical thought and practice intervened in capitalist social forms, even if the actors themselves didn't understand themselves as explicitly Marxist.
Queer practices intervened in capitalist social relations, even if they weren't specifically doing it because they were Marxists. All right, so we got to understand a couple things here for people who are new, and I apologize for the people who've heard me say this a million times, but we have to make sure all of our new people are brought along too. Alex just said a couple things that I think are really important to understand. One of the reasons I'm so interested in queer Marxism as an ideology is because it is a mutation of Marxism. It's not Marxism based in Marx and Engels and the Frankfurt School and all that. This is like this is what we call gain of function Marxism, where it is a mutation where basically the bat met the pig, just like in Contagion, and they got mixed up together, and then someone ate the pig that was infested with the bat, and then all of a sudden we've got a new plague-like element, and that element in this case is queer Marxism. So Alex actually just said that. He said traditional Marxism does not account for queer Marxism. That's because queer is a mutation from traditional Marxism. That's what gain of function Marxism is. The other thing that he said is that queer activists intervened in capitalist social relations. To queer Marxists, capitalism is not just an economic model, capitalism is also a cultural model. The main goal of queer Marxism is to annihilate capitalism via abolishing the gender binary. The gender binary means men and women, and the nuclear family. And these are all forms, the gender binary and the nuclear family are forms of capitalist social relations. They're how we relate to one another. And so they want to get rid of those because that's how they get to the cultural model of capitalism. And Alex basically just said both those things. Queer Marxism is the most socially relevant form of Marxism. I mean, I would argue that it is. Yeah, absolutely, because queer Marxism is all about the cultural aspects of capitalism. That's what it's trying to destroy gender, trying to destroy all identity groups, trying to destroy the nuclear family. So queer Marxism is almost entirely focused on destroying all the different forms of social relations that they believe uphold normativity or capitalism. So making the kids non-binary in schools fights capitalism even if the kids are not Marxists. Exactly. Listen to what he said again.
Accounted for sexuality and the unique historical conditions of queer struggle. And fourth, that queer radical thought and practice intervened in capitalist social forms, even if the actors themselves didn't understand themselves as explicitly Marxist. So the book constructs a history of the queer radical tradition by focusing on three movements in particular. The first is the gay liberation movement of the late 60s and early 70s. Then it looks at the Black lesbian feminism of the late 70s, early 80s, and then at the radical AIDS activism of the late 80s, early 90s. And it finds something different than what queer studies might lead us to expect. So the field of queer studies is broadly conceived, so broadly speaking, concerned with the question, how is gender and sexuality produced? That question already repudiates any notion of a transhistorical or natural gender and sexuality, but it rejects not only the notion that human gender and sexuality is a naturally binary form or that heterosexual desire is natural either, but that any one organization of gender and sexuality is natural at all.
As a reminder, when queer Marxists say straight or heterosexual, they don't actually mean a man and a woman. They mean a relationship that upholds normativity. They mean a relationship that upholds norms that uphold capitalism. So they don't necessarily mean a man and a woman. This is one of the code switching things that they do. They mean you are on the straight and narrow. You are normal. We know this because we have books of them saying this. There's writings of them saying this. You'll just have to trust me for right now. I'm not going to go back and look it up. But when they say straight or heterosexual, they don't mean one man and one woman. They mean you have a normal two-person monogamous relationship. Hang on, we got a super chat from No Mayo. Can't stay but want to support your work. We'll catch up tomorrow. Hey, thank you, No Mayo. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
So the field really inquires into the historical and social forces that give rise to all forms of gender and sexuality. And the literature is both interested in how those social forces produce human sex-gender systems and how they produce the categories of thought through which we give meaning to those systems. A lot of ink has been spilled over which social forces are the most important or the most determining, but the books that have become the most canonized within the last 3 decades tend to be studies of how gender and sexuality are shaped by norms and discourses, by expert knowledges in the fields of sexology, psychiatry, demography, gynecology, and so on, by the juridical structures and governmental rationalities of modern states, and by the racial logics of colonialism and imperialism. A queer Marxist body of thought that has until recently remained relatively marginal within the field focuses on capitalist social relations. So on divisions of labor, on property relations, and on structures of exploitation, dispossession, and proletarianization.
Wow, capitalist social relations, you don't say.
As you know, the field of gender studies has recently become an object of obsession among the forces of reaction in many contemporary capitalist societies.
Hi.
And the question is, why is this happening? So
I
what is
can't
it?
imagine.
What makes scholarly inquiries into the complexity of...
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. You assholes are running around talking about eliminating gender and destroying the nuclear family to upend capitalist social relations. I can't imagine, Alex, why people might be upset. I can't imagine why people might have an issue with you guys wanting to teach children in school that gender is not biologically real. The answer eludes all of us. Everyone was always just gonna, like, yes, queer Marxists, yes, why don't you just destroy everything that upholds our worlds? Like, this sounds like a great idea. You thought we were all just gonna accept this shit and roll over and take it? Bro.
Gender and sexuality seems so threatening. If our gender and sexual lives are not simply the reflection of a natural or biological truth, but are rather constituted by social relations, then we have to confront the fact that we make gender and sexuality, and that we can make gender and sexuality differently. And with that insight, we enter a realm of...
We make gender and sexuality, and that means we can make it differently. So what they mean by that is that they believe that gender and sexuality is a socially constructed model based on capitalist categories. And they believe because capitalism created things like gender, this is what they believe, not what I believe. They believe capitalism created the socially constructed categories of men and women. And if capitalism created these socially constructed categories, then we can very easily just undo those social categories by just rejecting the model that capitalism created. Dave Rubin and his relationship with his man and the way they have kids could be called heteronormative even though they're gay. Close. It would be called homonormative. Homonormative means basically gays that are upholding capitalist ideals. So basically they view them no different than the straights. Dave Rubin and his husband, who is also named David, believe it or not, I met them both. I was at their house many years ago. Dave Rubin and his husband are in a monogamous two-person relationship with a capitalist marriage, a capitalist form of property relationship, and they have kids. And even more than that, they bought their kids. They bought their kids in an act of capitalism. So they're like doubly homonormative. So yes, like actually they would be considered straight under this ideology, but they have a special term for gays who assimilate to the straights. It's like a special kind of slur.
Choice, and we're suddenly faced with questions of justice and freedom, self-determination, ethics, agency and accountability, solidarity, and indeed emancipation. That's the fundamental insight that animated radical struggles for gender and sexual freedom. Eros and Empire is a book about generations of radicals who embrace the threatening proposal that our existing configurations of gender, sexuality, and sex are not, in fact, the natural order of things, but rather up to us to make anew. So the most private aspects of our lives became for them a vantage point from which to collectively reconsider society as a whole. But the model of resistance and political change that I found in the history of radical queer struggle looks very different from the one that you might find in queer studies. So canonical queer studies, with its focus on discourse, language, and the realm of the symbolic, tends to conceptualize political resistance as an accident or as a form of failure. So the idea is that people necessarily fail to enact or to perform normative ideals of gender and sexuality, thereby opening up new possibilities for gender and sexual expression. That's a view of resistance and freedom that does demand a transformation in many complex social arrangements, but it is one that nonetheless often appears to be compatible with prevailing relations of capitalist exploitation and class domination. The subtraction of capitalist social relations of production specifically from their consideration has limited their accounts of the constitution of sex-gender systems. And without an analysis of the relation between sexuality and capitalist reproduction, queer theorists have often ended up endorsing cultural, political, and legal changes that leave relations of exploitation intact. Even if queer radical movements didn't always identify as Marxist, although many of them did, their primary goal was not, as much canonical scholarship would have us believe, a subcultural rejection of prevailing gender norms through performances of alternative expressions of identity, but rather a transformation of society as a whole, including the nuclear family, private property, the gender division of labor, and alienated wage labor altogether.
Oh, yeah? You're telling me the goal of queer radicals from the very beginning was a radical transformation of society that abolished the nuclear family? Oh, yeah? Can you say that again, bro? Thank you.
Was not as much.
Hang on, rewind a little bit more. Play.
Queer theorists have often ended up endorsing cultural, political, and legal changes that leave relations of exploitation intact. Even if queer radical movements didn't always identify as Marxist, although many of them did, their primary goal was not, as much canonical scholarship would have us believe, a subcultural rejection of prevailing gender norms through performances of alternative expressions of identity, but rather a transformation of society as a whole, including the nuclear family, private property, the gender division of labor, and alienated wage labor altogether.
So destroying nuclear family, abolishing private property, the definition of capitalism, of course, is private property ownership, and what was it, gender division of labor, which is all about the gender binary, about men being in the workplace, women being in the home, doing the unpaid labor of having and raising the kids within the nuclear family with capitalist values, which perpetuates capitalism via social reproduction theory, which is why they want to destroy the nuclear family in the first place. This is like a perfect clip. Logan Lansing is indeed a massive dumbass. Let's just listen to that again. That was just so beautiful. And actually, I'm going to clip that. I'm going to clip that right now. I'm not even going to wait till later. So beautiful. Perfect clip. Perfect clip to describe queer Marxism.
Capitalist exploitation and class domination. The subtraction of capitalist social relations of production specifically from their consideration has limited their accounts of the Constitution.
Did I accidentally fast forward? No, that was okay. I just went back too far.
And class domination. The subtraction of capitalist social relations of production specifically from their consideration has limited their accounts of the constitution of sex-gender systems. And without an analysis of the relation between sexuality and capitalist reproduction, queer theorists have often ended up endorsing cultural, political, and legal changes that leave relations of exploitation intact. Even if queer radical movements didn't always identify as Marxist, although many of them did, their primary goal was not, as much canonical scholarship would have us believe, a subcultural rejection of prevailing gender norms through performances of alternative expressions of identity, but rather a transformation of society as a whole, including the nuclear family, private property, the gender division of labor, and alienated wage labor altogether. US-based queer radicals since the 60s shared the conviction that the pursuit of erotic bonds and pleasure and self-determination are central to the cause of revolutionary transformation on a world scale. So they articulated queerness as a site of insurrectionary pleasures and erotic bonds, and the generalization of those erotic bonds as they saw it demanded overcoming the social relations that were central to the reproduction of US-led global capitalism. So as I write in the book, projects of erotic world-making under US empire were united in their conviction that the pursuit of eros could create openings for the supersession of the existing global order and the instantiation of egalitarian systems through which we could collectively and cooperatively determine the ways our gender and sexual lives are produced and reproduced. Okay, so that already gets us into the argument of the book. So part 2, empire. So what is this global order, and how do these struggles take form in relation to empire? So US power has organized the expanded reproduction of global capitalism for the past 70 years, and it continues to do so today. US power may be increasingly contested, and the actions of the current administration may be accelerating some of its own self-undermining tendencies, but we nevertheless still live under US empire. And by we, I, of course, do not just mean people living in the territories of the United states. The reality of US empire is such that the vast majority of humanity is subjected to the power of US state and capital, no matter how far beyond its territorial boundaries. This reality is in fact what differentiates US empire from past empires of the British, the French, and other European states. The US constituted itself as an empire in this period precisely through its renouncement of formal empire. We see this in the way that the US advanced imperialism through a touted commitment to democracy, equality, and self-determination. That is, it formally disavowed the racial supremacy of previous empires and founded its expansion instead on an international framework of human rights, universal freedom, equality, and private property, as codified within the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So explicit associations with imperialism and empire were evaded as the rhetoric of supremacy was substituted for a universalist discourse of development and modernization. We see this as well in the way that the US concealed its own colonial settlements of North American territories by asserting its origin in anti-colonial struggle against the formal British Empire. The ability of the United States to present its ambitions in universalist terms was key to securing its hegemony. So the US identified the conditions for its own imperial rule with the reproduction of global capitalism as a whole. And that mediation is how the US state was able to represent its own particular interests as the universal interest of the international system. So total political, military, economic, technological dominance was said to endow the US state with the ability to guarantee and enforce the general conditions for the reproduction of an international system that is based on universal rights of self-determination and national sovereignty. This system is what international relations scholars refer to as the liberal international order. So the liberal international order is defined by the recognition of formally independent sovereign states across the globe, underwritten by an extensive infrastructure of international institutions, from economic institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to political institutions like the UN and collective security arrangements like NATO. But what is liberal about the international order? The term liberal refers to the separation of politics and economics in this interstate system. So the United States harnessed a division of the globe into capitalist states whose character was a separation between the political sphere and the economic sphere. That division enabled US capital to exploit labor and natural resources that were located overseas under the formal political jurisdiction of another state. So in other words, it opened up markets for land, labor, and resources to US capital that had formerly been enclosed within the formal empires of the British and the French, and so on. So this liberal international order allowed the United States to project its economic power globally whilst also recognizing the universal rights of national self-determination, political independence, and formal sovereignty for newly formed nation states. Okay, that's part two. Part three is Eros. So how have political struggles taken shape in relation to that model of informal empire? In my book, I argue that persecuted populations have historically been able to appeal to the supposedly universal rights and freedoms that the United States proclaims in its constitution or in the charters of international governing bodies. However, those liberal rights campaigns ironically confirm the very foundation of the US state by mobilizing its universal rights discourse of liberty, equality, and security. It is in that way that certain LGBT subjects over this period have historically become contingently assimilated within the project of US empire. So Jasbir Puar's notion of homonationalism does describe that incorporation of gays and lesbians within the US imperial project during the invasion and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, during the War on Terror, and indeed more recently within its state-sponsored genocidal war in Gaza. But while people know of this concept, and it's probably the most well-known articulation of that process, the book shows that this is actually part of a longer history of LGBT politics that stretches back to the 60s. An alternative tradition of radical queer struggle, one that I chart in the book from gay liberation to Black feminism through to AIDS activism, sought not to affirm the universalist discourses of the US state, but rather to expose the realities of violence and exploitation that those universalisms formally observe. So they aim to heighten the contradictions between this illusory universalism of freedom, equality, and security that is proclaimed by the US state, and the concrete realities of racialized, gendered, and sexual hierarchization and violence upon which US capital depends. So allow me to sketch this in historical terms. So very schematically, because we don't have time, I'm going to go over a 60-year history of sort of US-led capitalism and talk a bit about how these three movements responded to them. So in the post-war decades, US workers were compensated for their subordination to the bureaucratized and maximally rationalized and highly repetitive Fordist production process with higher wages and increased leisure time.
Socialists oftentimes it doesn't happen all the time, but like socialists sometimes call basically the period of industrialization the Fordist industrialization, and what I really like is like when they call the nuclear family the Fordist nuclear family, because when it comes to queer Marxism, they believe the nuclear family was essentially created during the Industrial Revolution. They believe that the nuclear family is not always something that existed, but was created during the Fordist period, and so they literally call it the Fordist nuclear family, just like they're in Brave New World.
That period, so we're in the 50s, 60s. That period of unprecedented capitalist growth depended on the reconsolidation of a patriarchal nuclear household that solidified the gender distinction between masculinized wage labor in the factory and feminized unwaged activities in the home.
He just delineated the gender binary. The nuclear family capitalism created the gender categories of men who went into the workplace and they had the labor. I don't know exactly the word he used. We'll listen to it again. But men went into the workplace where they had access to all the power and all the money. Women were relegated into the home where they did the unpaid labor of having and raising the children. And those children perpetuate capitalism because they grow up with capitalist values and then they go into the labor force, yada, yada, yada. That's the gender binary. That is the gender hierarchy. Their solution to this is to abolish gender entirely, abolish the categories of men, abolish the categories of women, and then you get gender equity. Listen again.
Increased leisure time. That period, so we're in the 50s, 60s. That period of unprecedented capitalist growth depended on the reconsolidation of a patriarchal nuclear household that solidified the gender distinction between masculinized wage labor in the factory and feminized unwaged activities in the home.
Hey, we're gonna rewind this and listen again, but I want to say to the person on Rumble that's complaining that I blocked them on Twitter, you obviously did something to deserve being blocked on Twitter, and if you think that you can come in and whine during Socialism Saturday, and that is going to lead to me unblocking you on Twitter, that is just foolish, bro. If you want me to unblock you on Twitter, come to class, show an interest in what we're doing, don't be an asshole. I don't want to hear any whining in my chat. If I hear from you again that you're whining that I blocked you on Twitter when you did something to deserve it, I don't block people who do nothing to deserve it, then I'm going to block you on Rumble as well. Whining is not the best way to get me to unblock you. Pro tip. Now listen.
Nuclear household that solidified the gender distinction between
I'm going to rewind a little bit more.
Increased leisure time. That period, so we're in the 50s, 60s. That period of unprecedented capitalist growth depended on the reconsolidation of a patriarchal nuclear household that solidified the gender distinction between masculinized wage labor in the factory and feminized unwaged activities in the home. However, primarily available to white heterosexual industrial workers, that family model pathologized, policed, and repressed those forms of domestic arrangement that fail to approximate this nuclear family ideal. The racialized and non-normatively gendered and sexualized surplus populations who couldn't afford or access that ideal constituted its disavowed underside. Far from being inclusive and universal then, the normative family ideal depended on differentiation. It also coincided with a remarkable period of capitalist development during which the US dominated the globe in military, technological, and economic power. That post-war period of capitalist development also corresponds to the adoption of Fordism across Western Europe and North
Fordism.
America. The post-war reconstruction of advanced industrial states institutionalized mass production and consumption on a vast geographic scale and occurred under US auspices. So it was administered by the post-war international economic and political infrastructure, and also supported by major labor unions in the US. The patriarchal household was the anchor of that regime's gender division of labor, and the US state instituted new forces of repression to enforce it. The gay liberation movement emerges as a struggle against that organized state oppression.
Oh.
So it's amid forms of repression linked.
The gay liberation movement emerged as a struggle against the oppression of the capitalist, Fordist, nuclear family. You don't say. And by the way, when they say liberation, they mean liberate oneself from capitalism, free oneself from capitalism. So it's not as much about them being gay as it is about the liberation piece. Because remember, the nuclear family is created by capitalism. The nuclear family perpetuates capitalism. Therefore, when they're talking about the gay liberation movement, it really doesn't have anything to do with who they're fucking. It has to do with what, like, this system that is being perpetuated.
To the normalization of the Fordist nuclear family that gays and lesbians generated new conceptions of sexual expression, identity, and liberation. The utopian articulations of gay liberation understood the characteristics of post-war Fordism, that is, the reconsolidation of the nuclear family, the construction of binary gender and sexuality, the socialization of workers into a highly productivist work ethic, and the coupling of mass production to mass consumption, as fundamentally premised on the repression of human desires and erotic connections. The solution then seemed clear to them. Emancipation could only be achieved through the unleashing of flamboyant displays of unrepressed and non-normative sexuality. The liberation from the increasingly tedious, de-skilled, repetitive, and bureaucratized nature of labor under Fordism, from its rigid sexual classifications and hierarchies, and from the repressive state apparatus that enforced them, meant first and foremost the liberation of Eros. This was a utopian envisioning of a future in which human beings would achieve a relationship to their bodies, to their erotic lives, and to their sexualities that was no longer mediated by capitalist social relations. In the 1970s, US empire enters into imperial crisis, and the neoliberal reorganization of state and capital is gradually set into motion.
Just so you guys know, my book about queer Marxism is going to be so much more entertaining than this. People who have read the first few chapters of it already can attest. My book about queer Marxism is not some dry lecture about capitalism. My book about queer Marxism is telling the story of it. Like, here's all the things that happened, and here's all the characters of it, and here's when they met, and here's what they talked about, and here's the riots they had, and here's the different things they tried to do. I actually tell a story. This is a very dry lecture about what this is, and I just want people to know that I'm going to write a way better book about queer Marxism than Alex wrote, and he's going to be really upset about that because my book is going to be better.
So in the 70s, the problems of intensifying international competition and sharply declining profitability in manufacturing industries encountered imperial overreach. US military expenditures for the disastrous war in Vietnam continued to rise at exceptional rates, and former colonies were able to hike up their export commodity prices, seen most dramatically, of course, in 1973, during the oil embargo that was proclaimed by OPEC in retaliation for US support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The military and legitimacy crises of the US following the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam signaled a dramatic reversal in the configuration of world power in favor of the second and the third world. Western states faced inflationary pressures, collapsing property markets, stagnant economic growth, and rampant unemployment, and a set of neoliberal policy reforms was pursued in an effort to restore profitability. These policies, first trialed, of course, by the US-backed military dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile following the overthrow of its left-wing government in 1973, comprised regressive taxation, deregulation, privatization, trade liberalization, and the repression of political opposition. They dismantled social welfare, steadily eroded wage gains and levels of labor unionization, extended private property rights, and reduced state investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Neoliberal monetary policy led to an upsurge in asset prices while wages lagged behind consumer price inflation. And as producers were unable to realize their investments due to overcapacity and overproduction, sustained capital accumulation came to depend on waves of speculation, eventually culminating in the housing market bubble of the early 2000s. Over that period,
thanks,
the Fortis
Ginny.
family was
Appreciate it.
replaced gradually with the low-wage dual-earner family model.
Oh, hang on. We gotta go back and break that down. I just want to make sure I get this super chat in. Guys, we're not even halfway to our super chat goal yet. We're not even halfway. And again, as a reminder, I'm much more likely to not yell at people if we meet the super chat goal. So you guys can really help me out. I dedicate hours and hours a week to researching the far left, finding these videos that we watch, breaking things down. I'm willing to answer pretty much any reasonable question that people have about what's going on. And I do all this stuff hoping that you guys will see value in what I do and that you will compensate that value. Please feel free to throw in $5, $10. Help me meet that $100 goal. The sooner we help meet that $100 goal, the happier I'm going to be. Let's rewind and listen to that part again.
To realize their investments due to overcapacity and overproduction, sustained capital accumulation came to depend on waves of speculation, eventually culminating in the housing market bubble of the early 2000s. Over that period, the Fortis family was replaced gradually with the low-wage dual-earner family model. The neoliberal restructuring of New York City after its spectacular bankruptcy in 1975 follows almost exactly this script. So the sort of financial bailout that ensued after New York's bankruptcy entailed drastic cuts to social spending, including education, healthcare, and transport infrastructures, the disciplining of municipal unions, the implementation of wage freezes, and the diversification of consumerism through gentrification and a rebranding of the city as a cosmopolitan cultural center. The redevelopment of industrial manufacturing and warehousing spaces in the city into underpopulated luxury condominiums and apartments displaced working class communities, a process that David Harvey has described as, quote, a coup by the financial institutions against the democratically elected government of New York City, which was every bit as effective as the military coup that had earlier occurred in Chile. So the conditions for the unfolding of an epidemic couldn't have been more favorable. Upscale development projects and reductions in social service provision hurled racialized and queer working class New Yorkers to the margins of society, where they, of course, were immediately struck by the crack and AIDS epidemics, leaving entire communities vulnerable to impoverishment, criminalization, homelessness, and death. It was during that phase of transition from Fordism to neoliberalism that Black feminism emerged as a distinct intellectual and activist formation. So the United States' response to the imperial crisis of the 70s diagnosed federal welfare programs as the primary cause of the crisis. A bipartisan consensus emerged which posited the welfare state as undermining the moral fabric of American society, and the welfare state became regarded as a radical threat to the American family. The decimation of redistributive welfare was therefore required to save the American family, and fiscal austerity measures and rising inequality were met with the rhetoric of personal effort and individual responsibility as the American family was privatized as an alternative to social welfare. Those of you who've read the Melinda Cooper will be very familiar.
The American family was privatized as an alternative to social welfare. What does that mean? That means the American family, the nuclear family, is considered to be a form of private property under capitalism. It's privatized because people within the family have access to money and resources that the family has access to that is not available to the broader collective. That is why it is a unit of private property. Because it is a unit of private property, the left wants to abolish it because they believe it is private property that is what perpetuates capitalism. Does everyone understand that? Hey, thank you, $50. Rumble Ram from SS Kennedy over on Rumble. Rumble is kicking YouTube's ass today, guys. Rumble is kicking YouTube's ass, and now we're almost to the goal. YouTube, you guys suck. You guys suck. I'm going to be more friendly to Rumble now, because Rumble is the one that's donating super chats, and YouTube isn't even chatting in. I'm watching all of you on YouTube. You're not taking this seriously enough.
welfare state as undermining the moral fabric of American society, and the welfare state became regarded as a radical threat to the American family. The decimation of redistributive welfare was therefore required to save the American family, and fiscal austerity measures and rising inequality were met with the rhetoric of personal effort and individual responsibility as the American family was privatized as an alternative.
Donnie Girl instantly puts YouTube back on top. See, I knew you were going to do it, Donnie Girl. Donnie Girl is such an amazing supporter. Donnie Girl was like, I'm not letting Rumble beat us. Donnie Girl was like, there ain't no way Rumble's getting ahead of us. She took care of that. Thank you, Donnie Girl. I appreciate that as always. And look at that. Now we're past the goal. I want people to feel free. See, now I'm happy. I want people to feel free to continue to send me money if you would like to do so. But I appreciate everyone that allowed us to meet the goal for today. And let's continue.
To social welfare. Those of you who've read the Melinda Cooper will be very familiar with this story. The Black lesbian feminists during this period rejected the valorization of the heteronormative ideal of the family as a remedy for the crisis of the 70s. By revealing the prescriptions of heteronormativity as constitutively racialized, Black lesbian feminism updated the gay liberationist contestation of heteronormativity for their conjuncture in the 70s. They were able to persuasively draw connections between white supremacy and heteronormativity by locating the roots of their coevocation within the process of empire building. Accordingly, the affirmation of US empire was conceived as fundamentally incompatible with the pursuit of erotic freedom, or sexual freedom or bodily autonomy, or even love within non-heteronormative intimate arrangements. The texts of numerous Black lesbian feminist writers contain a conception of heteronormativity as aiding the project of empire and a conception of eros as the negation of sexual and racial differentiations produced under empire. They saw sexual agency and love between Black lesbians as a threat to systems of intersecting oppressions. So in the context of systemic devaluation and outlaw from these institutions of bourgeois nuclearity and respectability and desirability, expressions of erotic love among Black lesbian women could constitute a form of affirmation and resistance. Both the gay liberation movement and the Black lesbian feminist movement were aligned with third world anti-colonial struggles the world over that were fighting for a post-capitalist, post-imperial restructuring of the global world order in the 60s and 70s. By the late 70s, however, it had become clear that national independence alone would not fulfill the desires that the anti-colonial liberation struggles had carried with them. As it became clear that national sovereignty and economic development would not guarantee the transcendence of imperialist social relations, their dreams of decolonization were shattered. Traditional forms of political struggle, most notably labor unions and attempts to seize state power, began to appear to radicals in this decade as ill-equipped to confront the restructuring of global capitalism. The highly dispersed and differentiated forces of resistance that surfaced in this period were primarily oriented towards the defense of livelihoods against neoliberal capitalism's ravaging ways. They included struggles against resource extractivism, habitat destruction, privatization, and austerity measures, and they frequently identified the international levers of finance capital, most notably the IMF and the World Bank, as their primary antagonists. And of course, that neoliberal phase of capitalist development proved no less coercive than former periods. So the US sought to crush any form of resistance with uncompromising brutality through the sponsoring of state terrorism, coups d'etats, and associated forces, as well as through the imposition of embargoes and economic sanctions. One resistance movement in that decade was represented by the AIDS activists. Those activists envisioned public non-familial sex as a negation of the neoliberal privatization of sexuality, adapting the gay liberation.
Why do queers like public sex? Listen. Why do queers, why did just this week we watch a workshop given at the City College of New York in which they were talking about bootlicking and having a kink party after? Why is it that queer activists are always somehow involved with public sexcapades in some sort? Listen.
And associated forces, as well as through the imposition of embargoes and economic sanctions. One resistance movement in that decade was represented by the AIDS activists. Those activists envisioned public non-familial sex as a negation of the neoliberal privatization of sexuality, adapting the gay liberationist view of Eros in a time when it wasn't homosexuality that was criminalized, but rather certain forms of non-privatized sexual practices.
They are rebelling against privatized sexual practices within the nuclear family. That is why they're doing public sex. That is why they're doing bathhouses. That is why they're doing all this stuff to rebel against the privatized normative model of sex.
Of embargoes and economic sanctions. One resistance movement in that decade was represented by the AIDS activists. Those activists envisioned public non-familial sex as a negation of the neoliberal privatization of sexuality, adapting the gay liberationist view of Eros in a time when it wasn't homosexuality that was criminalized, but rather certain forms of non-privatized sexual practices. Accordingly, Eros was conceived as the defense of certain practices of erotic freedom that took place within the public cruising spaces that faced closure and redevelopment under neoliberal privatization in cities like New York City. The eroticization of safer sex and the destigmatization of non-normative sex acts represented for these radical activists both the defense of those public sexual cultures that were endangered by neoliberal gentrification and a prefiguration of egalitarian social systems where distinctions between social class, race, nationality, gender, and sexuality would dissolve in the generalized quest to cultivate new forms of love, sexual pleasure, and promiscuity. The eroticization of everyday life became, again, the horizon of erotic world-making. In sum, all three struggles were defined by a counter-investment in pleasure as a proxy for the total transformation of social relations. Their pursuit of Eros was both a strategy to articulate the repression, violence, and exploitation to which they had been subjected, and a basis for a politics of transformation and liberation. They sought to generalize erotic bonds that they believed were imminently antagonistic to the foundations of US empire, that they believed exposed the governing myths that dissimulated the relations of domination that its expansion depended upon. Okay, and final part, this is the speculative part about US empire today. So the US has entered a period of what can be described as dominance without hegemony. The universalist rights discourse that legitimated the expansion of US-led global capitalism is no longer convincing. US power is increasingly unable and seemingly also unwilling to dissimulate its imperial ambitions through universalist discourses. In the first 2 months of the Trump administration, we've witnessed a wholesale assault on the very global infrastructure that enabled the consolidation of US dominance in the name of returning the US to its rightful position as the world's dominant power. Everything from NATO to USAID, institutions that the US had historically wielded to advance imperial interests abroad, are instead framed as magnanimous charity projects that are draining national resources and therefore curtailing US power. The administration, it seems, has bought into the US state's own governing myths. It claims that the global infrastructure of US power is now being used against the US. That's no longer our problem, is now the refrain of US leadership in talks with their allies, hardly the sentiment of a global hegemon. One way to think about this shift is as a transition from the informal empire of the post-war period, advanced through the US-backed liberal international order, to a more formal model of empire based on territorial acquisition, see gangsterous posturing over Greenland or the Gulf of Mexico, televised face-offs with foreign state leaders, and a return to explicit ideologies of national and racial supremacy. America First signals dominance without hegemony, exceptionalism without universalism. The US is no longer seeking to disavow its own imperial ambitions through an appeal to the interest of the international system as a whole. Advancing its own interests is no longer mystified as advancing the universal interest. Crucially, this has meant an erosion of the liberal character of the international order that divides states and the interstate system into a political sphere where states can appear as formally independent and equal, and an economic sphere where states are stratified within the capitalist world system. Examples abound of this sort of erosion of the distinction between politics and economics. an unelected tech billionaire leading a federal advisory board, the US Justice Department announcing that it will no longer enforce corruption laws against US capital operating overseas, senators calling to abolish the TSA and replace it with private security companies, alongside the more general increased role of private military subcontracting within the Pentagon. These things are all reminiscent of the actions of the capitalist states of formal colonial empires, which often elided this distinction between the political and the economic sphere. So for example, consider how private trading companies like the East India Company were granted political rights by the sovereign British Empire, such as, so the East India Company was allowed to build its own empire, collect its own taxes. It had territorial dominion, it minted its own money, and so on. The most glaring case of this development are Trump's obscene pronouncements on Gaza. Here, Trump's imperialist imaginary proceeds through the prism of real estate development, dispensing with all mediations of ideology, of international law, and crucially, the very liberal character of the international order itself. I assume you've all seen the AI video of a Trump Gaza tower surrounded by luxury condominiums on the Gazan shoreline. That video conjures up a future where Donald Trump is imagined to own the land outright.
If we ever hear the left mention Lucas Gage's song, Boom Boom Tel Aviv, if that ever comes up in any sort of leftist presentation, I'm gonna die. That would be hilarious.
So that is, it's a future in which the US president enriches himself personally through territorial settlement, a state leader participating directly in plunder and appropriation. In that colonial imaginary, institutions like the military lose their illusory status as neutral instruments of public power and are instead remade as tools of personal power to enrich a political ruler. The US state is not imagined simply as the guarantor of existing property relations, but rather as an active participant in the creation of new racialized regimes of extraction, occupation, and exploitation. Again, this is evocative of more formal models of colonial settlement and dispossession. And those developments take us beyond this liberal architecture of informal US empire. The erosion between the distinction between the political and the economic spheres is maybe best captured by the far-right blogger Curtis Yarvin, who has recently characterized Trump's plan for Gaza as, quote, turning it into the first sovereign corporation to join the United Nations. Even if these plans only exist at the level of right-wing trolling fantasies, they express a desired substitution of informal liberal empire for a more formal fascistic empire. What does that mean for struggles for sexual freedom today? Well, it's not the first time that the US's hegemonic status is in crisis. And it's also not the first time that US imperial violence has found such naked expression. The radical struggles that I study in this book seized upon precisely these moments of hegemonic instability to contest relations of US dominance. Many have already pointed to the parallels between the 1970s and today: overproduction, economic stagnation, multiplying surplus populations, and inflation that is precipitated by war and imperial overreach in Vietnam or today Gaza. And it was, of course, during this period, as I said before, that the Black lesbian feminists articulated their most potent critiques of imperialism. But we can also consider the 90s, when radical AIDS activists faced down successive administrations that refused to share prevention materials that featured explicit same-sex material, imposed travel bans on HIV-positive migrants, and introduced trade policies that restricted the procurement of AIDS medication in sub-Saharan Africa to protect the profits of pharmaceutical companies, all within the context of US wars.
Breaking news, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. Do you guys want to see what the argument that the classical liberals on Twitter are making against me? Do you guys want to see the intellectual grandeur of the classical liberals? Now, before I show you the intellectual grandeur of the classical liberals, the first thing we're going to do is look at my Twitter account, okay? The first thing we're going to do is look at my Twitter account. It's a little break. It's a dry lecture. It's an important lecture. We're getting a lot of clips out of it, but sometimes you can take a little break. Toasty Seats says, this lecture was months ago. A lot has happened since then. No, Toasty Seats. That's not correct. It is correct this lecture was months ago. It is not correct that the left has significantly deviated from what they believed in this lecture months ago. The left has believed what is in this lecture for literally decades. The last few months have not changed anything, and I'm sorry, that's just incorrect over on Rumble, but stick around, ask some questions, and you may learn a thing or two. But so I want to look at my Twitter account for today. So for some reason, my book commercial, my book trailer that I spent so much time making is getting an obscene content warning. I don't know why. Just because there's a murder child swinging a bloody sword on my book trailer doesn't mean that. But anyway, that's on the Twitter account. That's pinned to the top of the page. We're talking about the American Communist Party being ridiculous. We're tweeting the stream. People are sharing the stream that we're doing about queer Marxism. American Communist Party, Socialism Saturday. Reagan got a retweet. Oh, I retweeted this thing with the nymphs dancing around the fire because I thought that looked cool. Clips from the Socialism Conference. This guy called me Jewish. I said he was retarded and posted my ancestry DNA. I posted something in response to the Wall Street Journal. Some newspaper articles. We're talking about the Christian stuff with the Christian question. Trump and Gavin Newsom. I'm sure this isn't real, but this was hilarious. Gavin Newsom, in a sudden bout of rage, allegedly yelled, "You stupid orange N-word" in a private phone call with Trump, according to the Wall Street Journal. If Gavin Newsom actually called Trump a stupid orange N-word, that's actually fucking hilarious. That's actually hilarious. More clips. Oh, we got a clip of Carrie there. Oh, we got a clip of James. Oh, clips of James. So anyway, that is what is on my Twitter account currently. That's what's on my Twitter account currently, okay? Now let's go over to what the classical liberals, Carrie Smith and Frank McCormick, are talking about. Frank has made yet another AI image of me where he's making me look fat and disgusting and manly, and apparently like I'm at Cracker Barrel, and I fucking wish I was at Cracker Barrel, but I promise you, if I actually went to Cracker Barrel, I wouldn't be wearing white, and I certainly wouldn't have it spilled all over my shirt. Also, I get the chicken and dumplings when I go to Cracker Barrel. What the fuck am I eating in that picture? I don't even know. But the classical liberal Frank McCormick says, Karlyn Borysenko is at it again with non-stop posts about Carrie Smith and James Lindsay. I'm sure she's proven even Cracker Barrel's unlimited flapjacks has a breaking point. And so then they made a bingo card about me, apparently. And of course, Carrie is responding, and Carrie is retweeting it. So, you know, seems like there are some classical liberals over on Twitter that are upset when we show people what they say. Carrie is feeling a little upset that we found a clip of her calling a room full of black people low IQ, because she's not allowed to do that as a classical liberal. I can call a room full of black people low IQ because I'm not a classical liberal. But Carrie calls a room full of black people low IQ. Well, that's a different story. So this is the latest classical liberal attack, and I just thought you guys would all be amused by that. This is what I have to put up with, guys, to teach socialism on the internet. Do I ever get attacked by the left on the internet? No, not really. Do I constantly have to deal with this fucking retard? Yeah. All the time. All the time. Anyway, just wanted to show you what's going on. How does it feel to live in their minds? You know, I kind of wish I didn't. I kind of wish they would stop being so obsessed with me. It's like an irrational obsession. Frank McCormick has a complete iPhone full of, like, images that he's made of me. If we go to his media, Well, he's got some stuff about like he's been. Oh, there's me on Frank's page. There's another thing of me. Anyway, looks like he hasn't been making as many AI images of me as he used to. That's about me. That's me. Frank McCormick is an obsessed little bitch, isn't he? Too bad. Too bad, so sad. Anyway, I just thought you guys would be amused by that. Let's go back to the video. Break over, fun over. No more fun allowed ever again. It is very stalker. It is. It is. Anyway. Frank wants to, oh, I don't even want to think about that. I don't even want to think about that. Oh, I heard about this. Yeah, some website is saying that I'm Jewish. How stupid. How dumb. It's a Romanian website. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's go back to the video. Wait, did I accidentally stop the video and restart it from the beginning? Oh, shit. Where were we? Why did it restart from the beginning? That's not fair. That sucks. It just Vimeo sucks, man. Oh well, we'll find where we left off. It's fine. My fault for taking a break. That's okay. He was almost done to the Q&A though, so. Where does the Q&A start? Okay. Oopsie poopsie. Yeah, exactly. Play. Wait, they're repurposing the silence equals death thing for the Gaza thing? That's interesting. I haven't seen that. Oh, you guys can't hear it? My bad. Let me fix the sound. My bad. My bad.
And mass
There you go.
deportation, again, within the context of war.
Hang on. Now my browser's doing something stupid. One more time! One more time for posterity! One more time!
Queer and trans activist groups have repurposed ACT UP slogans against mass death, like the silence equals death triangle, in protest actions against the genocide. Radicals have confronted strikingly similar conditions before, and in their struggles, they refuse to be backed into a defense of the status quo, a move that unfortunately seems to be tempting to many radical scholars today. Instead, they seized the opportunity to further heighten the contradictions of US empire and to articulate links between seemingly disparate sites of struggle: imperial predation, racialized violence, political repression, immiseration, and moral panics around gender and sexuality. With little to lose, they demanded the impossible in times when the realm of the possible seemed to be simultaneously shrinking and expanding. Thank you.
Q&A, Q&A, Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alex. Alex's book, Eros and Empire, is impressive in its scope, in its vast archive, in its capacity of theoretical formulation, and of methodological insightfulness. As I told Alex, I couldn't avoid underlining most of the book, and I'm not exaggerating. And writing countless little remarks of, oh my God, this is key, or I love this throughout its pages. Most of all, I believe Alex's book is an invaluable and timely addition to the still emerging field of queer Marxism. Alex's approach I'm going to focus on 3 points. Alex's approach to the transnational as a methodology for the study of queer radical sexual politics, his incredibly insightful reframing of gay assimilationist politics as nationalist politics, and his exploration of the relationship between history and theory with queer revolutionary thought. In his transnational study of US-based gay liberationism, Black feminist activism, and AIDS activism as situated within the different regimes of capital accumulation that characterize post-war US empire, Alex rejects both what he calls methodological nationalism and its formal opposite, methodological globalism. Instead, he advocates for an approach to the transnational as a methodology to examine queer radical sexual politics that should be firmly rooted within the imperial nature of capital social relations and its production of gendered, sexual, and racialized inequalities. Such an approach thus unavoidably demands the study of the bourgeois nation-state form and the erosion of its borders, what in my view makes for an exciting methodological intervention in the field of queer Marxism. What this concretely means is, first, that 20th century erotic word making and gender and sexual formations are thus situated within the US-led expansion of the interstate system and the virtual universalization of formerly independent nation states in the wake of decolonization that marks the post-war global order and the passage from European imperialism to US imperialism. Secondly, it also means that in this new global order, queer radical sexual politics are confronted with the mystification of the imperial nature of capital social relations by the ideological production and persistence of the myth of the possibility of capitalist modernization and equality through developmentalism, economic growth, privatization, and austerity. It also means that queer radical sexual politics, as approached by Alex, invariably take place within and suffer the pressures from the constitutive contradiction of the bourgeois nation-state form between formal or abstract equality and inclusion, as promised in its universalist premise, and the pervasive reality of structural inequalities amid continuous processes of dispossession for the sake of capital accumulation that are racialized, gendered, and heteronormative. As you can see in his approach to the erotic word making and queer radical sexual politics, Alex draws inspiration from and proposes an exciting dialogue with the Marxist theory of the state that is centered around the categories of abstraction and formality and of abstract or formal universalism, as well as on the inseparability of politics from economics or the state from the markets. This leads me to the second point that I would like to address in this conversation, which is Alex's reframing of gay assimilationist politics as nationalist politics. In other words, his analysis of the archive.
He reframed, that was different than what Alex says. He reframed gay assimilationist politics as national politics. Did you guys catch that? I know he's got a weird accent, but listen again.
Which is Alex's reframing of gay assimilationist politics as nationalist politics.
Gay assimilationist politics, which remember, these are queer Marxists. Queer Marxists are anti-assimilationist, anti-capitalist. Their nemesis are gay assimilationist, nationalist politics. Wow, that's crazy.
In other words, his analysis of the archive of 60s and 70s queer radical sexual politics through the lens of the existing and competing visions of gay nationalisms and gay internationalisms
Gay
within 20th century
nationalisms.
liberationism more broadly. Alex proposes an alternative approach to the more conventional framework to study 60s and 70s queer sexual politics of, on one hand, assimilationist politics, and on the other hand, radical or revolutionary politics. Instead, he proposes a remapping of the different strands of US-based gay liberationism that is based on the centrality of either internationalist perspectives or nationalist perspectives in the political programs and actions of the different groups taking part in gay liberationism. What this means is that his book opens an exciting new path for the investigation of queer radical sexual politics, queer political thought and histories. On one hand, it shows that the then emerging and now hegemonic rights-based horizon of political formulation and action not only takes for granted the universalist abstract premises of the bourgeois nation-state form.
If you can't understand what he's saying, it could be one of two things. One, you just need to listen more. It could be that you just haven't learned the language yet. But even better, you can ask questions. Like, you're allowed to ask questions like, what does this mean? What does that mean? I understand that sometimes formulating a question when you don't understand the language is hard, but oftentimes, like, the best thing to do when you feel like you don't understand what they're saying is to just sit back and listen and just let it wash over you and let yourself be immersed in it. This is like a language immersion course where, like, if you didn't speak French and you showed up in France one day, everyone's going to sound crazy and you're not going to understand anything. But 6 months later, you're going to understand everything because you immersed yourself in it and you just learned it that way. We're doing exactly the same thing here. So you can either formulate a specific question or you can just sit back and listen.
But also contributes to obscure how gender, sexual, and racialized inequalities are structural to the exploitation and to the processes of dispossession that are central to the reproduction of capital social relations. Additionally, it demonstrates how gay nationalisms, past and present, end up participating in the reification of gender, sexual, and racial identities, in the exclusion of Black and trans radical activists, and above all, in the domestication of sexual politics. On the other hand, and this brings me to my last point, Alex's book complexifies the queer Marxist approach to gay internationalisms and anti-imperialism more broadly. The transnational lens to the study of US-based gay liberationism, Black feminist activism, and AIDS activism that Alex proposes explores the ties between the ties uniting these movements with third world anti-colonial struggles, socialist revolutionary movements, and anti-war movements, among others. It shows that these movements were deeply influential to US-based queer radical sexual politics. Alex also shows that despite being often neglected, anti-imperialism is at the center of such ties and thus consists of an effective transnational tool to reinterpret US-based movements and their legacies. Therefore, in the first place, his book adds to the queer Marxist literature on how gender and sexual non-normative practices, communities, and identities here and worldwide are not the result of neoliberal subsumption after the spread of globalization. Secondly, because Alex does not separate queer histories of political struggle, from political struggle. Secondly, because Alex does not separate queer histories of political struggle from the elaboration of theory, he interprets the formulations of gay internationalists, Black feminist activists, and AIDS activists on anti-imperialism as theoretical discourses. What I find really fascinating about this, and what I see in my own work I want the Cuban and Brazilian revolutionary gender and sexual normative cultures in politics during the Cold War, is that such a perspective makes visible how 60s and 70s queer radical sexual politics involved the active dispute of what anti-imperialism and internationalism should look like. As Alex emphasizes, the commitment to anti-imperialism meant the radical queer activists situated gender and sexuality at the heart of broader discussions of what emancipation, revolution, or socialism should look like. In no other example, this is clearer than in the case of US-based gay activists that went to post-revolutionary Cuba with the Venceremos brigades. As Alex shows, the disillusion with the repression of homosexuality in Cuba in the 60s and 70s was elaborated in the language of anti-imperialism. Gay internationalists rejected and denounced sexual repression with a reformulation of anti-imperialism. In Alex's words, and here I quote, in installing sexual liberation as an integral component of the struggles against imperialist capitalism, they contributed to a reconfiguration of internationalism. They envisioned an internationally coordinated project of freedom that was truer to the revolutionary reinvention of social relations, end of quote. Or in the 1971 words of the Gay Committee of Returned Brigadistas, and I quote, gay people own allegiance to no nation, end of quote. After reading Alex's wonderful book, I was left with the feeling of radical hope and with the incredible excitement and historical perspective that only deep intellectual stimulation can provide. And I don't think there is anything more important right now in these appalling times than the possibility of finding hope, once again, the construction of emancipatory collective political action and intellectual stimulation in the contact with the histories of global radical politics.
Stunning and brave, stunning and brave. Do the Q&A.
Okay, so now we're open to questions, everyone here or online. We're gonna be checking the Zoom chat, the Zoom page. Anyone wants to start?
So I really love a lot of the content of the book. I was wondering if you had anything in the book that had talked about sex workers, because I feel like if you don't, that's missing a really vital piece of sexual liberation and people who are really on the front lines, especially trans, queer, and then intersex people as well that comes to mind. Asexual people as well feel like maybe like there's an argument there for the agency of withdrawing or making a choice to not do sex is also I think a form of that.
Well, I think that question because it wasn't.
So I understood that as a question about the role of the presence of sex workers within the book, but also forms of asexual romanticism in these struggles as well.
Yeah, mostly like I think like sex workers is probably like more of like but my question too.
They're talking
like,
about sex workers. Let me see if the captions are on.
What about intersex in this conversation?
Yeah. Should we take like some more?
If there are any.
Yeah. I don't know. Online? No? Okay.
I think maybe related to that question, I'm really excited to read this book. I am really excited too about a project of queer Marxism that's not trying to find moments when queers are speaking to Marxism or Marxists are speaking to queers, right? I think you're offering us a kind of redescription of the later 20th century, the way that I find exciting.
These guys are going to love
my book. I'm
also
wondering if there is a kind of subject presumed by the archive that you are presenting, right? Like a kind of avowedly queer or gay or lesbian political subject. And I'm wondering what the ramifications of that kind of subject or political identity grounding your study might be if we're trying to take a broader historical perspective, right? Like what would a queer Marxism for like the long 20th century look like? It's maybe what I'm trying to ask. And does that look at different kinds of subjects, I guess as a follow-up to that, than queer studies has typically tended to center, right? Which, is sort of like queer studies will make a lot of noise about. We're looking at like sexual and gender alterity, but some people have critiqued it for still basically looking at gays and lesbians, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear you speak to it.
Oh, did you guys hear what he just asked? He was basically saying like they were talking about formulating queer as a political identity rather than just as gays and lesbians. So basically what he said, and we're going to listen to it again just to be sure. Excuse me. My God. Basically what he said was like, have you looked at queer in a way that isn't just about being about gays and lesbians?
queer or gay or lesbian political subject. And I'm wondering what the ramifications of that kind of subject or political identity grounding your study might be if we're trying to take a broader historical perspective, right? Like what would a queer Marxism for like the long 20th century look like? It's maybe what I'm trying to ask. And does that look at different kinds of subjects, I guess as a follow-up to that, than queer studies has typically tended to center, right? Which, you know, is sort of like queer studies will make a lot of noise about. We're looking at like sexual and gender alterity, but some people have critiqued it for still basically looking at gays and lesbians, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear you speak with it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Remember, anyone can be queer, guys. You just have to declare that you are.
On the archive, and also just asking you to maybe situate the book in queer studies a bit more explicitly for us. You know, like a lot of the terms that you used during this talk, Alex, like were reminiscent of Munoz, I think, like utopian horizon, world making. And so, and also like Munoz's book covers, I think, much of the same period that you are. So I was wondering if you could maybe like answer the like, isn't this just Munoz question? But I think like it's importantly not maybe at the level of archive, whereas Munoz is thinking about the aesthetic and performance. I just wanted to ask maybe like, is your materialism or your Marxism necessarily anti-aesthetic?
Okay, should we start there?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, I'm actually going to take these questions together because they work very well. This book is a critique of Munoz. So the if we think about the question of the political subject, maybe I'll start with the political subject in queer theory and then what happens in this book. So if you were to, so this book isn't really social movement studies because it's not that interested in the formal aspects of the movements, like continuities between membership and political tactics and organizational forms. Although it also does that. But if you were to read most studies of political struggle, you would find that they're focused on traditional forms of social movements.
Thanks, Reagan.
I use this term world making that has been recently used by Erum Getachew to talk about movements for decolonization. And she's been critiqued for focusing mostly on the role of elite men in leadership roles in anti-colonial struggles. The word world making in queer studies and in Munoz, both in Cruising Utopia and in Disidentifications, is explicitly trying to move away from formal kinds of social movements and ask what appears when we're not just focused on traditional movements, what other forms of politics emerge in these like interstices or whatever. And that's great. But also, ironically then, queer studies has elided the fact that there are formal political movements in queer political history that almost never get spoken about. So if you think about how Munoz characterizes politics in queer studies, first, he thinks of these sort of utopian articulations of the future or whatever as forms of knowledge production, mostly. So it's there's a sort of intervention in governing norms and discourses and cruising and artistic practices and performances and all of these things are seen as a sort of form of critical knowledge production that can disrupt governing notions of how things work. But the problem is that, I mean, it's not a problem. That is like, he's writing about that he's sort of within literary studies and he's doing something different. But the problem for thinking about queerness in politics is, first of all, if you think of queer politics in that way, then things like ACT UP or the Gay Liberation Front can't really appear. I mean, these are transnational organizations that have chapters across dozens of chapters across the world with very formal organizational structures and don't actually conform to many of the ideas of performative subversions and so on that Munoz is speaking about. And so queer studies is weirdly just like sort of has a sort of weird form of amnesia about actual political struggle. The group that comes up the most is Queer Nation, which is a very short-lived very ineffectual movement of the early 19
I don't know about
90s,
that, Alex.
but that sort of converges more with the spirit of queer studies, I'd say.
Queer Nation was the group that wrote the Queers Read This pamphlet that was distributed at New York Pride in 1990. That Queers Read This, we've read it on the channel. Well, we had a trainee read it on the channel. Queers Read This is basically like, it's like one of like the founding zine. It's not like a founding zine because queer Marxism is way older than that, but it's like, it's a very, very important and influential zine. So for Alex to say that Queer Nation was ineffectual, it's kind of like, well, what was the goal, Alex? Like, what was the goal? Was the goal to advance queer Marxism? Because if the goal was simply advancing queer Marxism, Queers Read This was extremely effective in achieving that goal.
And so I am actually moving in the book back to a more traditional form of political struggle, a traditional form of political subject that would seem sort of counterintuitive to the whole ethos of queer studies, but it's sort of like turning things on its head. One of the things about Munoz and that are sort of the aesthetic performances of transgression and so on is that he doesn't really say anything about which one of those are effective. How do you plan a performative interruption of the given? How do you organize that at scale? How do you strategize? How does it become partisan? None of those things come up in his conception of world making. But those were the questions that the ACT UP activists were asking themselves. So they were doing all sorts of die-ins and public performances, but they were very concerned with questions of endurance, organization, scale, partisan things that belong to sort of the realm of politics as we know it. In the book, the activists that I'm talking about aren't just interested in denaturalizing what seems normal or opening up possibilities for other futures or so on. They're interpolating people as political subjects rather than spectators or viewers of an artistic performance. Basically, this is what I think it looks like to take queer studies as it is mostly emerges within literature departments and moving into a political.
Yeah, performance means protest. Exactly. Yes.
So that's
like you got to understand that the left is very creative. The right is not creative. The right does not understand how culture gets built at all. The left understands art. The left understands performance. That's why most art and most performances, most plays, most music, most actual paintings, they're created by leftists. And so it's not unreasonable to see the protest as a literal form of performance art. And if you think about what ACT UP did, ACT UP was going into churches and doing die-ins where they were all laying in the aisles of the churches and they were dying in the churches to try to get people to acknowledge the death of the AIDS epidemic, right? That is a performance. Protest as a performance. It's like taking the play and actually making the play the protest. And that's part of how they're able to like pull on the emotional heartstrings of the situation. And quite frankly, they're very smart for doing that. Human beings respond to art. Human beings respond to performance. And this would be a lesson that the right should be learning, but they don't because they never listen, they never pay attention. But like protest as an act of performance. What do you think drag is? Drag is a performance. Drag Queen Story Hour is a performance.
Question that sort of covers both, maybe. So the longer history, maybe the question on the longer history is, if you then take that view, then the pre-60s history looks very different. But that was kind of my question, which is why is it that in the history, like in human history, we don't actually have political movements organized around sexuality and gender specifically until the 1960s. Of course, there were people living sort of in same-sex communities and resisting forms of repression, but they didn't organize a coherent political ideology until the New Left. And the answer that I'm trying to provide in this book is that it's because they were they were directing themselves against US empire and they became legible as political actors in a certain way. That's not to dismiss that longer history, but to say there is an important rupture there. And I think sort of it's important to note that discontinuity. And then for the sex workers are definitely present in the book, if only because a lot of these activists were sex workers themselves. A lot of the street queens and others in the books were like engaged in sex work as a means of survival. But sex work also plays a role in the theoretical framework of the book. So on the question of how does capitalism produce forms of sexual difference that are stigmatized and pathologized, those sort of when I talk about non-normative sexualities in the book that emerge under with the transition to capitalist societies, those are pretty much homosexuality and prostitution are the sort of two forms of public non-normative sexualities that are repressed within newly industrializing states. Yeah, so it plays both a role in sort of like a simple empirical way.
Did he just say that capitalism produced both homosexuality and prostitution? I mean, prostitution is pretty much a gimme, right? Obviously, the left does endorse sex work. They don't endorse it, but the left definitely, like, the relationship that the left has with sex work is actually very interesting, because the left does fundamentally see sex work as an act of capitalist exploitation, and at the same time, many leftist activists participate in sex work, and it's almost like I've heard them talking about how participating in sex work demonstrates the oppression of capitalism and stuff like that. But to hear him say that that capitalism created homosexuality, yeah, he just said that capitalism created homosexuality and prostitution. Hang on, going back. And he is correct that many early queer activists were also hookers.
Present in the book, if only because a lot of these activists were sex workers themselves. A lot of the street queens and others in the books were like engaged in sex work as a means of survival. But sex work also plays a role in the theoretical framework of the book. So on the question of how does capitalism produce forms of sexual difference that are stigmatized and pathologized, those sort of when I talk about non-normative sexualities in the book that emerge under with the transition to capitalist societies, those are pretty much homosexuality and prostitution are the sort of two forms of public non-normative sexualities that are repressed within newly industrializing states. Yeah, so it plays both a role in sort of like a simple empirical way in that a lot of these people were sex workers, but it's also kind of integrated in the theoretical frame where I'm trying to think about the relationship between capitalist reproduction, the division of the public and private sphere that anchors a gender division of labor, and then what happens to women who are working in the public sphere but don't conform to notions of sort of true womanhood or don't sort of pursue a life in marriage, but reproduce their lives through wage labor that's available to them, which is often in the informal service economy, and then often sex work.
Thanks everyone answer, but I could read it out again. What wave of feminism are you referencing to that sought to disrupt norms and senses of realities, as you say? So what wave of feminism are you referencing?
Oh, I was actually thinking of the kind of subcultural traditions that early queer theorists had in mind when they were writing. So I don't know, kind of like the ballroom scene, things like this. Spaces that weren't explicitly political or like animated by political ideologies, but were mostly just queer and trans people who were fighting for their own survival and making their lives livable under conditions of sort of brutal repression. They sort of, yeah. But I wasn't necessarily thinking about feminist theory, although that reminds me, on the question of asexuality, what's interesting is that the Black feminists of the 70s, their conceptions of eros are much more expansive than the traditions of eros that you find in sort of the male-dominated movements, and are sort of more encompassing of forms of aromanticism or sort of aromantic forms of love or sexual expression than for example, the gay liberationists or the AIDS activists.
What am I playing? I'm playing a stupid game on my phone that, like, it has early levels that are easy to beat, and I can play the levels and listen at the same time, because the levels by themselves are pretty... I'm playing a cooking game, okay? I'm playing one of those stupid fucking gay-ass cooking games that I'm obsessed with right now, but when you're in the cooking game, the early levels they're fucking easy and they're boring, and I don't like playing them, and so I thought that if I played them while we were watching the stream, I could knock out some early levels and also be more entertained. But I am listening at the same time. All right. All right, Simona. Are you happy? Shut the fuck up. Shut up. Don't judge me, all right? Play my game. You guys can't stop me. I'm gonna beat this fucking level too.
This comes out of, I guess, stuff that you told me and about previously, which is that, if I remember correctly, there's like one of the projects of
Out of Lives. It's over.
One of the projects of the
It's
book is to think about how is there a relationship between like, you know, the empirics of these particular movements historically situated in time, and what kind of theory emerges from that historical moment, right? So the obvious one here, I guess, is like how the sort of Judith Butler post-structuralist school of thought that comes out of English departments in the 1990s are responding to the AIDS crisis at the time, responding, not responding, depending on how you think about that theoretical strain. But is there a kind of, if we move back in time, so with the Black lesbian movements and the gay liberationists, what kind of theory comes out? Because in a sense, what you're talking about now is how queer studies think about all of these historical movements now. But was there a kind of historic theoretical response to these situated historical moments of like actual political empirical struggle? Yeah.
I'm gonna ask also two questions. The first one is, I feel like in the book there is a constant presence of anti-imperialist resistance in the Caribbean and in Central America, in Cuba, Grenada, and then Nicaragua, and it seemed to me that like there was a lot of response from US-based movements, queer radical movements, to what was going on in the Caribbean. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that the revolutionary tradition within the Caribbean and Central America, was it particularly influential to those movements that you study? That was one question. And the other question is, I also felt it was sort of like present in the book, the collapse of the Soviet world and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and how that was also influential mostly to the AIDS movement and post-neoliberalism. But I wanted to ask you, while writing it, if you were considering what it meant in terms of further dispossession and the spread of neoliberalism, and how it is reflected in your archive in terms of the political imaginaries.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Yeah, so the question about theory and practice, it's an interesting one, because in the book, I'm trying to I read the activists in the movement as producers of theory in their own right. And I read academics as sort of a source of, like, as historical artifacts, like as a source of sort of discourse. and sort of the other way around too. So in the case of the AIDS activist, that's most obvious. Like you have the AIDS activists and you have the things that they were writing that you can read in the archive. And then you have queer theory, because that's the decade when queer theory is institutionalized and becomes a discipline. And if you read the book, that chapter is also the most sort of disconnected. It's like, oh, this is about ACT UP and this is about queer theory, but that itself reflects the moment, which is there's like a quite strong, sort of divergence between the academics who receive these prestigious positions in universities and the people who are working on the ground. That looks different in the gay liberation movement. You get all of these writings, which is amazing for anyone doing historical work, mostly because there was such an emphasis in the 60s on coming out as a political tactic. So they're all writing these like memoirs and all these things about their personal experiences and so on. But those texts, very few gay liberationists would have been formally employed by universities. Some would have had loose affiliation.
Can I just say, it's kind of like, this is just a general statement, like the audience is dwindling down, the lecture got boring, whatever. The only people who are here right now, if you are still here listening to this, you are the hardest of the hardcore, and so I feel like I can say this. It is amazing to me how much more my community knows about queer Marxism than anyone else on the internet. It is amazing to me that we can hear things like this guy, and most people don't even know who this guy is. We've watched him several times on the channel. We can hear things like this guy talking about the parallel of the ACT UP movement and queer theory being institutionalized in the university, and all of us are like, duh, bro. Fucking duh. But it's just amazing to me to think about, and this might be a little esoteric, but you go outside of our community, no one else knows this. Like, we look at stuff like this and we're like, yeah, obviously, imagine that. But no one else knows this. Literally, no. How many other people are talking about the ACT UP movement? How many other people are actually talking about the anti-assimilationist versus the assimilationist? How many other people actually talk about this stuff? Fucking no one. And that's why no one else understands this. That's why you see all these unhinged lunatics on Twitter ranting and raving about grooming and all this bullshit, because they haven't taken the time to actually understand what they're talking about. And it's just it's just kind of like a weird thing. It's a weird thing to consider the juxtaposition of people in this community that are like, yeah, duh, bro, obviously. And then you look at the people on Twitter, or you look at other people doing commentary on this issue, and they have no fuck off idea, and they're complaining about Cracker Barrel.
With formal centers of knowledge production, that of course completely changes their sense of accountability, the political stakes of their analysis, their sense of...
You bring up stuff, this is an interesting exercise for people who haven't done this before. If you bring up stuff that you've seen on this channel in like polite company, you're gonna get looked at like you have three heads. People are like, what the fuck are you even talking about? And you're like, I just watched this thing last week from Colombia and he said X, Y, B, and Z and all this stuff. And I've seen all this stuff over and over. Like, people look at you like you're crazy. Like, this is what Alex Jones must have felt like for years, where Alex, and listen, I don't think that Alex Jones is like the bee's knees or anything, but you can imagine that, like, this is what Alex Jones must have felt like for years, where he's like, I'm looking at the evidence. He's like, I'm looking at it. It's right here. It's right in front of me. Like, you can look at it too. And no one wanted to listen to him, and everyone just called him crazy. And then they all complained about whatever they were upset about at the time. But he's like, I'm looking. And eventually he was vindicated. And you know what? Eventually I'm going to be vindicated too. And we're all going to be vindicated. But it's like you think about, there are all these different groups of people in the world, and they all have different parallel realities. And sometimes we think we're on the same team as people, and then we find out, oh no. They're just living in a completely separate, different reality. They have actually no idea about what's going on in the world. I tell the lady I work with what I'm up to on Saturdays, and she says I need a new hobby. No, she needs a new hobby. No, she needs a new hobby. We are at the tip of the spear. No one else is ahead of us. Like, literally no one else is ahead of us. I see LMC over on Rumble says, I called someone a comrade the other day. He looked surprised and then he smiled, so not sure what he was thinking. Oh, ooh, look at this. Are you a communist? Are you a communist or are you just a retard? Let us know. Like, we haven't had any good retard sightings on the channel tonight. Are you a communist, Snoop, or are you just a retard? Are you upset that I'm not going to debate Haz al-Din because he's not a real communist and the American Communist Party is fake? Is that what you're upset about? Please let us know in the chat. Elaborate. What are you upset about? Use your words. You're smarter than all of us, right? Elaborate in the chat. What are you upset about tonight? We're winding down the presentation. We can take a moment to talk with a retard who has somehow found his way to my stream. What are you upset about? Oh, so you're a very special kind of retard where you waited 5 minutes to subscribe to my channel and you didn't realize we're not communists. Do you think we're communists? Are you that very special kind of retard where you found my channel and you subscribed to it because you're going to tell me off, but in the 5 minutes that you had to wait to actually speak in my chat, you didn't bother to look in the description on the video that you're watching? Are you that very special kind of retard? Let us know. We're waiting. What is your grievance explicitly? Retardia is here. You know, we've had a quiet night. There haven't been a lot of retards in the chat. Snoop, we're waiting. What is your grievance explicitly? You're a real American? You're a real American, bro? Are you a MAGA boomer? Are you a MAGA boomer? You're here to tell off the commies? Then what are you complaining about? What exactly do you think we're doing here, Snoop? What exactly do you think that we're doing? You're a real American and you're going to tell us off? What exactly do you think we're doing here, bro? We're waiting. Can you use your words and explain to us what you think you've walked into because you haven't bothered to do the bare minimum of research? See, these are the people that are, yeah. I think you're a clickbait, a retardation. Okay, that actually doesn't mean anything. Are you a, I'm going to talk really slowly because you're obviously really fucking stupid. Snoop. Are you a MAGA boomer conservative or are you a communist? Which one is it? No. Snoop, I need you to focus. I need you to focus right now. Are you a conservative or a MAGA cultist? Or are you you're America first? Oh, what does that actually mean? Do you support Israel? I'm America first. I voted for Donald J. Trump for office. Are you a MAGA boomer or are you a communist? What exactly do you believe? Are you able to articulate what you believe? Are you able to? Yeah, he's absolutely a fucking conservative. He's a fucking liberal? He's a fucking liberal. Oh, bro, you hit maximum fucking retard. Hey, Snoop, we're a bunch of racist, neo-Nazi, anti-communists here, and we hate Israel. And we have feelings about Jews. And so I don't think you belong here, bro. You can show yourself out. What an idiot.
Readership and audience.
Fucking liberal.
Yeah, so the sort of theory that comes out of the gay liberation movement takes shape in a completely different way. But those are mostly political texts.
Yeah, that was probably James.
The Black lesbian.
That was probably James Lindsay's sock account.
Feminist movement of the 70s.
Yeah, we love bagels.
It's actually poetry, I would say, that is the the sort of political literary form, but each chapter reflects the texts that are being produced. So the first chapter, there's a lot of like diaries and memoirs and manifestos. The second looks at more literary texts and also poems, and then the third just looks at queer studies. Yeah, I think that would sort of be the answer. And I actually don't try in the book to install either side of the theory praxis divide as primary or inherently more radical or anything like that. But certainly to think about what was being written in relation to like who are the communities that they're speaking to and what that means for what comes out of those theories. Okay, the question about the revolutionary tradition in Central South America and also the collapse of the USSR, that's a good one, mainly because the AIDS activists were very inspired by the struggle, the Sandinista movement in Nicaragua, a lot of the solidarity movements with Guatemala, in part because a lot of these activists were operating out of the Bay Area, where it was like large migrant communities, and a lot of the activism sort of comes together in those areas. And this is also the AIDS activist movement takes shape, as you said, right sort of during the collapse of the Soviet Union. What this means is that on the one hand, you have a total discrediting of the socialist tradition, right after also the anti-colonial movements had dissipated. And so anti-imperialism, which was sort of a uniting frame for the global left that had existed for almost 30 years, disappears. And that is like, yeah, that was quite disastrous. I mean, that was like the world historic defeat of the left, really, that the AIDS activist movement comes out of. So the AIDS activists don't use the language of anti-imperialism. They don't even use the language of socialism. That would have been very different for the Black feminists and the Black liberationists, where you can read their texts and then you can look at sort of material from anti-colonial struggles halfway around the world, and you'll see the same slogans, the same sort of imagery, and so on. But so what you get in the 1990s is a form of sort of resistance politics that looks very different than the form of anti-imperialism and socialism from the preceding decades. And those were inspired mostly by sort of Central and South American context, because they really knew how to resist the intensification of neoliberal capitalism that was so like what was happening in South and Central America at the time wasn't too dissimilar from sort of the violence of financialization that was happening in urban cities in the US. And so it would make sense that they would copy each other's politics. But there too, it was a very different kind of politics and a very different revolutionary tradition. It's kind of the reason why I couldn't say that this book is about queer anti-imperialism. Like if it had just sort of stopped at the 90s, then that would have been the frame. They were all transnational in orientation, but I don't think they were all anti-imperialist, or at least they were in some sense anti-imperialist, but that wasn't the language that they used to describe their movements.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
That it? Are we done? We made it? We only had one retard on the stream tonight? Wow. That's pretty crazy. Well, guys, thank you for meeting the goal with Super Chats. Special thank you to the people who spent in the $50 Super Chats. We had Donnie Girl over on YouTube. We had SS Kennedy over on Rumble. Thank you to everyone who sent in Super Chats as well. I appreciate you guys supporting the work I'm doing. As always, the very best place to support the work I'm doing is over on my Substack. That is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. If you missed it this week, we did expose the City University of New York for having a bondage class. That was pretty great. I have a job, bro. I have a job. I teach people about communism and socialism, and I research it and I write about it. I literally have, like, I don't know, like, why are these people so upset? I literally have a job. I don't know what you're so upset about. Why don't you get a fucking job? Like, you can find this over on my Substack. We exposed the City University of New York this week for holding a kink workshop That was pretty great. You can find that over on the Substack. You can also find my writing and read the first couple chapters of my Queer Marxism book, the draft chapters, before the book is released. I am working on the chapter about the Stonewall riot right now. It's actually almost done. Hopefully it's going to get released either tonight or tomorrow. I've got basically up through like the 80s kind of written and drafted in this book. It's going to be a great book. I'm actually really excited about it. The book is an exploration of the development of queer Marxism as a political ideology, Bro! This is a communist. This is a communist who are telling us that the Denver communists are the same as Democrats. Bro, the American Communist Party is completely beclowning itself. I thought the American Communist Party was fake before this. The American Communist Party in the past 48 hours has completely fucking beclowned itself. Do you understand, retard, that to anyone who watches my channel, you look like an absolute moron because we have watched the Denver communists? Anyone who thinks the Denver communists are Democrats is absolutely intellectually dishonest and retarded. They have entire presentations about the Democrats on their channel, bro. You guys don't do the bare minimum of research into what you're talking about, and that is why you are fake fucking communists, and that is why I'm not going to waste time debating Haas, because Haas is not a real communist, and the Denver communists are very, very clear that they believe you guys are fascists. So you're ridiculous. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. We are way smarter than you. My book is going to bring down all classical liberal bullshit. It's going to be great. It's going to be fucking awesome. Okay. Anyway. Guys, that is all we have for Socialism Saturday tonight. As a reminder, I do not stream on Sundays. Usually, I'm not planning on streaming tomorrow. We do movie night in the supporter Discord on Sunday nights and Monday nights. We do movie night tomorrow at 8 p.m. We do it on Monday night at 9 p.m. I hope you guys will come and join us in the supporter Discord for a movie. And with that, I bid you adieu. Have a great rest of your night. Have a great rest of your weekend. I'll see you on Monday at 5 p.m. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer. I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that? I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.